Police officers who had to arrest other police officers. What's the story? I'm a county deputy sheriff. I actually had to arrest 3 separate members of the justice system in 2020. First, a practicing lawyer and former judge who had been utilizing his position to coerce bedroom favors from the defendants. He utilized this leverage even after he wasn't a judge anymore. Investigation by DCI revealed that he had about a dozen victims, so a warrant for his arrest was made, which I executed. Arresting a guy you used to put defendants in front of is a very odd feeling. He weaseled out of prison time and got it all suspended and put on a direct supervision probation program, which is absolute horse crap. I've seen guys do way less and get way more time, but it's not really a secret that money has a habit of tipping the scales of justice, is it? Next was a prison guard who attacked his girlfriend, then stalked her relentlessly. I actually arrested him twice after he posted bail on the first time because he was spotted lurking outside her home only 45 minutes after being released. He's currently on felony assault, strangulation of a household member, felony violation of a protection order. He's still in my jail awaiting trial with a bail that's been substantially increased. I'm anticipating prison time for him, but only time will tell. And the third was a city police officer because we received a call from a 6-year-old that his dad was in the garage doing substances and wouldn't come out. We showed up to find 4 very young kids running around unsupervised. It was a city police officer smoking crystal that he'd confiscated during a traffic stop and not reported or turned into evidence. DCI took the case from us due to potential conflict of interest and have placed him in another county's jail, and I haven't heard any more about it. I hope he does time too. What kind of monster leaves his little kids totally alone and unsupervised while they smoke crystal? Especially when said person is a frickin' cop. Unforgivable in my opinion. But yeah, 2020 has been a very strange year for me. My dad was the arresting officer of an undercover narcotics detective for the murder of 2 fellow officers. From what I remember, the 2 officers and a technician caught him by surprise while he was stealing from an evidence room. He shot the 2 officers first and then his weapon jammed, so the technician escaped. Detective got life in prison and died there. Can't go into too much detail, but I had to book in an officer for taking his female roommate's phone and then sending her personal undressed photos to his own phone. He then threatened to leak them unless she did bedroom favors for him, but she just called it in instead. And good for her. You have to hope that this was the last she heard of it. I know that some cops can take their colleagues being caught as a personal offense and go after the people who report it. So with any luck, maybe this guy was such a creep that the other officers just hated his guts as well. This was during my time as a United States Marine Corps MP. Never arrested another police officer during my other gigs. I got a phone call from a guy's wife saying he was drunk and refusing to leave the house. I knocked on the front door but found him crying on the porch about his wife leaving him because she wasn't happy anymore. She walked by the porch and motioned for me to come inside through the glass door. She proceeded to show me the red marks on her throat, the hole in the door that he'd punched through beside her head, and some other evidence that doesn't need to be disclosed. After asking him to come inside and get dressed, he refused to leave with me. I wasn't going to handcuff him in front of his kid, but he decided to take that moment to run from me. He was faster and got away for about 5 minutes before I found him walking through a playground a couple of buildings over. Caught up to him, he punched me, but was taken into custody after a slight use of force. On the way to the station, he tried to kick out a window in my cruiser and told me I was ruining his life. He ended up getting charged with about 7 different charges and was kicked out of the Marines. On his way out, he lied to NCIS and got an investigation opened on me for the unspeakable act. Investigation was completed thoroughly and all charges against me were marked as unsubstantiated, but the charges still showed up after I got out and went through a background check for my security clearance. 10 out of 10 would do it again anyway. My slight inconvenience was totally worth it to get that monster out of his household. My dad was a cop. He was still working as a full-time cop before switching full-time to firefighting and made a traffic stop at around 11 at night in the mid-80s. A nicer car, speeding well over the limits, so my dad initiates a stop. Before he's out of his cruiser, the driver has what looks like a badge hanging out of the window. My dad walks up, does the usual song and dance, and the driver said, "You obviously can't frickin' see who I am." And my dad says, "Yes, Lieutenant Colonel, I do, and right now I'm conducting a traffic stop." Turns out the driver was a lieutenant colonel in the Ohio State Highway Patrol, which is pretty high up in their rank structure. My dad again asks him for license and insurance, and the guy goes off. Threatens to call the governor at the time and threatens his job, that he was just trying to get back to Columbus after an engagement, and so on and so forth. Eventually, my dad calls for backup and has another officer there to witness what's going on. Eventually, my dad writes him a ticket, and while still screaming, Mr. Pulling Rank drives away. The next shift, my dad gets called in by his assistant chief and is asked about the stop, and apparently the colonel of OSHP was calling him in about it. In the end, they had to bring in the other officer to write a statement of what went on, and in the end, nothing came of it except the ticket wasn't contested and paid. Probationary officer goes on a blind double date with his roommate. Been at the racetrack drinking, so they take the train to downtown. Everyone is pretty drunk, him in particular. Maybe to entertain or show off for his date, he's acting goofy. As everyone's getting off the train, he sees some guy bent over tying his shoe. Rocket scientist decides to leapfrog over the guy, only neither of them have much balance. Probationary cop basically jumps over/on the guy and drives his face straight into the pavement because he's too drunk and the guy wasn't expecting it. Everyone jumps up and he starts trying to defuse the situation he's just caused. Turns out the guy is a 17-year-old kid heading down to spend the weekend with his grandparents and has 2 broken teeth and a broken nose. The drunk cop starts saying stuff like, "It's okay, it'll be fine, I'm a cop, it's all good." When he realizes the crowd isn't just going to let him walk away, he bails on foot and tries to run off. A few guys chase him down and grab him. The cops get called and detain him. I was the on-call detective who was called out at 10:30 at night to handle the case. He refused to answer any questions and was booked in for felony battery, based on the extent of injuries and the age of the victim. He never made it off probation and just had to resign. I wrote up and submitted the packet to the DA for prosecution. Nothing was swept under the rug. Trust me, a guy like this is not wanted in the police department. He was a probationary officer, so it would be easier to terminate him. The case was put through the system by the DA, and he ultimately took a plea deal. A plea deal is very common across the entire spectrum of cases, whether it be a vandalism, theft of $1 billion, drug charges, or murder. It's probably the most commonly used tool for adjudicating cases, so I don't think a plea deal was arranged because he had been a cop. Remember, he was arrested and charged by the same department he was a probationary officer for. Former police officer and correctional officer here. I never actually arrested a fellow cop myself. However, my field training officer was arrested and fired from my former department twice for drunk and disorderly conduct before I worked there. He got his job back twice through the union arbitration and, to his credit, gave up drinking. Then when I was working at the jail, we had a cop who was put into protective custody and watch in case he tried to self-delete after being arrested for stalking a woman he met on call. He got obsessed with her and kept bothering her after the fact, and after she reported him, he made threats against her. We had 7 officers at the jail beat a disabled inmate and then lie about it on their reports. The shift commander then tried to erase the video. Everyone was fired and arrested but were later acquitted of all charges. Sad thing was, they were all guilty as hell. I got a call one night about a domestic. Upon arrival, this woman was bleeding heavily from her face. She said her boyfriend was a cop and he was in the next room. We talked to him and he tells us how she deserved it. Had to use force on him and get him in custody. Guy had close to 8 years inside, fired on the spot by IAD when they arrived. F him. I have no sympathy for that kind of monster. Yeah, I for one am very glad he wasn't smart enough to try and obfuscate it in any way. That kind of guy needs to be off the streets as quickly as possible and shouldn't be in charge of dealing with similar civilian cases. Ex-sheriff's deputy here. One night on shift, I had the great misfortune to overhear on the radio that a small local chief of police, whose department was only 3 people, was not answering a radio call. So, my shift partner goes out to the call that they're trying to get him to go to, and I make my way to try and locate this chief of police. On my way to the police station, thinking maybe he's asleep on the couch, I see his squad car pulled off onto the side of the road, lights going. In that moment, my heart sank. My first thought was, oh no, this guy just got killed in a traffic stop. As I'm walking up to his car in a hurry, I notice that he's slumped over. I reach into the open driver's window and grab his shoulder to try and put my fingers against his neck to feel if he has a pulse or if his skin is still warm, and generally check to see if he's still in fact alive. As I'm doing this, I notice a distinct and strong odor of alcohol. As the chief of police wakes up, looks at me, puts the car in drive and pulls away. About that time, another deputy pulls up behind my car and I put on my radio that the chief is driving off. The other deputy, forgetting that we all use a shared frequency, then comes over the radio and says he should be easy to follow because his lights are on. The lights go off. Fast forward to several hours later, command staff is out at the police department seizing the weapons and evidence that are stored within the department. This chief of police shows up with the mayor of the small town and submits himself to a breathalyzer. He barely passes. Fun fact, district attorneys do not like prosecuting chiefs of police, especially when politics are starting to get involved. Unrelated to that, I was let go about 2 weeks later for calling a suspect a butthole. Unprofessional conduct charges. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I saw a true crime video where this police officer killed his ex because she was trying to divorce him and she had really nice life insurance. He was struggling really hard with bills, and apparently the crime split the whole police department up. People who thought he was guilty versus people who couldn't believe it and thought he wasn't. The side that was on his side were co-workers for years. They simply couldn't believe that someone they'd worked with all that time could do that. He had a good rep at work, but at home he was different. In the end, he was caught because he was the only one who had keys to the car that she drove, and the police found a paper with calculations on it that were how much money he'd have left over after the life insurance paid off his debt in his house. This evidence was pretty much the last missing factor because the cops had a very hard time building a case because he'd covered his tracks pretty well, plus he made sure he had a strong alibi. He honestly would have gotten away with it. In the beginning, he was very helpful and gave as many statements as the cops needed. But the more evidence the cops were picking up, the more he started resisting and wasn't complaining anymore. He was actually pretty awful towards her, but she was the main breadwinner of the household. She got tired of it and was trying to move on and settle the divorce as calmly and nicely as possible, but he wasn't complying. It got to the point where he'd break in at the house whenever he wanted, plus he'd leave her recorded messages on the home phone. Since she was a nurse, she recorded all calls because sometimes her patients would call her and ask questions. But when the cops searched her place, they thought it was very weird how those tapes from his calls were missing. After all, he had a key. Plus, the murder was done in her work parking lot and his alibi was strong, but it seemed very plotted. On top of that, they did get a confirmation he rented a van. The same looking van that the killer jumped into after he killed her at the parking lot. Police couldn't trace the license plate because they were going off by the cameras from the car dealership across the street. It was too far to get a clear reading of it. Oh, and he had a very good reputation at work, but he also had a crap ton of circumstantial evidence against him. Oh, and he was sleeping around with a co-worker. My grandfather was a police officer. He was a colonel of the military brigade, I think Coronel de Polícia Militar in Portuguese. We're from north of Brazil, and in the 1960s, in my state's countryside, conflict with Native American people was very common. My grandfather told me the titular officer of the city was capturing Timbira people, protesting for their land, and torturing them. I remember him specifically saying something about kicking tied-up people in the backs until they bled, putting salt on the wounds, and stepping on them with military boots. That detail stuck with me. The thing is, my grandfather's grandmother came from this aldeia, I don't know the right term in English. The same ethnicity, same city, so he had a more sympathetic view of the Native American people, more than the typical Brazilian police officer from the 60s. He saw what the police force was doing in that city, and when he got called for supervising the conflict, he arrested the guy because he was doing that stuff to men, women, and children. The guy was demoted, some other guy came with the same approach, and absolutely nothing changed. That's what my grandfather told me. I don't know if it's true, but it's very plausible in the scenario that I know of in Brazil. I'm sorry for my broken English, by the way. I'm an actual cop, so I'll give an answer. I've arrested 12 cops for DUI, 2 of which included charges of possessing weapons while intoxicated. I've arrested 1 cop for writing a check on a closed account, another for violating a protection order during a very ugly divorce. I assisted the feds on a couple of tax-related arrests. I've also arrested a total of 3 cops for dereliction of duty. One of those cops was a cop who didn't arrest or conduct a DUI investigation after a crash involving another cop. All of these cases proceeded in a very similar fashion as other people with similar backgrounds and criminal records would have had with similar offenses. The slap on the wrist is actually very common and the norm with first-time offenders. Also, the things I found cops arrested for are generally the same things other middle-class, blue-collar workers get in trouble for. Issues with substance overuse, particularly alcohol, and financial problems. My career is perfectly fine. I've faced absolutely no negative repercussions from any of my peers. I'd say if you work for a large enough agency, you've probably arrested or written a ticket to a cop. And yeah, I'm guessing that the larger your precinct is, the better protected you are from crooked cops who'd try to get you back. Much more oversight and a moving roster of incoming and outgoing cops. So they likely don't build up quite the same old boys club mentality that certain small offices do, although I'm sure some of them have bad batches of guys. If both cops try to arrest the other at the same time, is there a double arrest or a cancellation? Actually, there's cases like this. In New Jersey, a state trooper pulled over an unmarked, haggard minivan with a bunch of armed men in it. The trooper approaches the vehicle with his hand on his weapon, and when someone starts to get out, he actually draws his weapon. The people in the van aren't wearing uniforms or displaying any sort of identification, but they're wearing vests and carrying firearms. What happens can only be described as state trooper frickin' owns idiot county police that almost get themselves shot. There was a screaming match between the trooper and the county cops, with the latter being really angry that the trooper drew his weapon and held it low and ready until he could positively ID these guys as officers. The trooper goes back to his vehicle, I'm sure thinking that this is going to be a really crappy day, and one of the county police hasn't had enough and starts to aggressively walk towards the trooper, who again draws his weapon and holds it at his side. County cop is beyond indignant about this and actually begins trying to chest bump the trooper, who other than himself tossing a few choice words into the conversation, remains professional as can be expected when you just pulled over a van full of guys claiming to be county police narcotics squad conducting an operation on one of the major substance routes into and out of the county. I could be getting some of these details wrong, but it was the craziest thing I've ever read about. The trooper and the county cop, chest to chest, screaming at each other on camera, with one incredibly hot-headed county guy even throwing out some threats. I think the county guys ended up getting in some hot crap, and everyone but the county police department backed the trooper and said he was in the right, and the county guys almost got themselves shot. One I remember was a trooper that rear-ended a lady, and when he got out of the car to talk to her, his shirt was on inside out, untucked and disheveled. As he was talking to her at her vehicle, a beer bottle cap falls out of his shirt, and then he drops a magazine and a loose round. At that point, the lady was calling 911, and some other troopers start showing up. They do their duty and arrest him, but everyone is recorded saying that it's a shame it's already been called in and the call recorded, and there's camera footage from the other troopers responding. There's a video of a rear-facing camera after he's put in the car, and he looks out of his mind drunk. I think they ended up taking him to hospital because he claimed his absurd behavior was the result of having been put under for prostate surgery earlier that day. Which makes no sense because they don't let you drive off if you've been heavily sedated or totally knocked out, especially with your shirt all messed up and magazines falling out of your duty belt and pockets. Not me, but an uncle. Arrested an officer from another city for drunk driving, claiming to be the head of that city's police department. The actual head officer for that offending officer is my other uncle, the first uncle's brother, who was actually sitting in my uncle's patrol car before the off-duty police officer was tagged. The UK has a documentary series called 24 Hours in Police Custody. Series 6, Episode 1 covered Bedfordshire police investigating a blackmail case, where it turned out that one of the DCs working the case was actually the suspect. Incredible episode and well worth a watch if you can find it. The DC's name was Gareth Suffling and he was given a 3-year prison sentence. Not a cop, but a former dispatcher who filed a complaint against another dispatcher for jeopardizing public and officer safety. This person did not like me and would intentionally withhold information and not enter it into CAD, causing me on the radio to have delays in responding to other questions. When I'd finally had enough and reported this person to the assistant chief, I was sent home. 2 days later, I was fired for abandoning my post even though I never left. I called both the chief and the assistant chief out during my termination for this being a case of good old boys and collected my personal belongings. To this day, people ask me all the time why it is that when they call 911 at this particular city, they get told to hold. My response is usually that the dispatcher is most likely finishing their game of Candy Crush first. The thin yellow line of dispatchers and the thin blue line of cops are to never be crossed. You're either with them or against them. I'm a cop for a medium-sized police department. I've arrested 2 officers for operating while intoxicated. One of them was from my department. I arrested a lieutenant for domestic attacks and 1 more officer for retail fraud. I never faced any backlash and I wasn't fired or written up. Wow, back-to-back stories of 2 very different responses to the individual good workers doing their jobs and making difficult calls against their fellow officers. Just goes to show you can't know if your colleagues in this sort of job will back you up on the correct call or close ranks and protect their own from charges anyone else would be in deep crap for. I worked as a contractor for a law enforcement's digital evidence lab. There was a new guy who'd just retired as a cop but came on because apparently he wanted to do computer forensics and supposedly had some background in it. We were training together, learning about cell phone forensics, when he missed a day of training. That night, he was on the news because he'd been arrested after cops closed in on him for soliciting pictures from inappropriately aged people. We weren't part of the investigation bit, but did send his work computer over to the lab that was working on it, and he had some of the worst stuff you can imagine. Overall, we were shocked, but also couldn't not chuckle at the irony that he was a computer forensics analyst who didn't know how to hide evidence on a computer. My case was just domestic violence. Not much of a story, pretty clear-cut. Luckily, it was a visiting family, so not someone I knew. Other than that, I once tackled a guy who'd been fighting in a bar and threw cuffs on him, only to find out later he was a cop. I should have known when he immediately put his hands behind his back when I told him to do so, instead of fighting me as most drunks tend to do. Detained, but I didn't arrest him because I actually didn't see him punch anyone, and disorderly conduct has a lot of discretion involved, and I didn't know who started it. Gave both parties the information needed to file charges against the other, and a report was completed. Just a reminder that an arrest is not supposed to be a punishment. Being charged with a crime is the issue. I think DUI is the most common thing against other cops, though. I never did much traffic enforcement. I was once reading about how sometimes a wife will leave a cop husband to go to a women's shelter. The problem is that cops know all the shelters in the area, so sometimes they have to be sent a couple of counties over under top secrecy. I arrested 4 separate officers during my career. All 4 were unspeakable act offenders. To be fair, special victims were my forte, and internal investigations fell under my title, so it just shook out that way. What was the dirtiest trick ever pulled in the history of war? During the Second World War, German forces would rig crooked wall paintings to explode when straightened with hopes that it would kill Allied officers when they came in to set up command posts. The logic being that Private Joe Blow clearing the building looking for enemies isn't going to care or even notice if a painting is askew. But General Robert Important Guy, who sets up his new command post in the building and is in his office for hours, probably would notice. The Germans also strung piano wire across roads to take out anyone riding by in a jeep. Yep, my gramps told me a story about this. After he was wounded for his 3rd time, they made him a courier. He was on a motorcycle, and because of these piano wires, he'd always ride hunched over. He lost a small piece of scalp instead of his head when he drove underneath one of these wires. When Timur the Lame was about to attack the city of Sivas, he promised the 3,000 Christian Armenian Sipahis that he wouldn't shed any of their blood if they surrendered. So they surrendered, and true to his word, he had them all buried alive. In World War I, the Allies became used to the smell of chemical weapons and would put their gas masks on quickly. The Germans changed their tactics and then would use nearly odorless, stomach-emptying chemicals that would absorb quickly into the lungs first. Then, once the soldiers were all spewing up and couldn't keep their gas masks on, they would fire the main artillery barrage containing the lethal chemicals. According to some records in the art of war, it's considered a good strategy to corner your men and have the enemy attempt to wipe them out. Because when the only means of escape or survival is through the enemy, then your own men will fight to the death. The actor George Sanders found out that his friend David Niven was very chummy with Winston Churchill during the war. He asked Niven to give the Prime Minister a note detailing his idea for a new bomb that the RAF could drop on German cities. It would be exactly the same as all the old bombs, except it would have a wind-activated siren attached to it. So when the bombs dropped, the German civilian population hiding in shelters would hear the siren, think the all clear was being sounded, and come out just as the bombs hit. Niven didn't say how Churchill took the idea. Yep, a good reminder that although the people who were most arguably the least evil did in fact win, the maximization of civilian casualties were an accepted measure in decreasing enemy morale for a quicker victory. It's absolutely horrific. I don't envy the people making these calls. Not sure if this counts as a trick, but Napoleon prior to the Battle of Marengo. Not only did he cross the Alps with his entire army, a completely unexpected move, but once across, the Austrians thought that Napoleon would move to Genoa in order to relieve the siege of that city. Thousands were dying of starvation, and the French general Massena desperately called for Napoleon's aid. Napoleon, in a ruthless and surprising move, ignored the calls for help and instead moved to attack the main portion of the Austrian army, eventually winning the Battle of Marengo. Massena surrendered Genoa, and it would be years before he eventually forgave Napoleon for abandoning him. And it would be years before Napoleon forgave Massena for surrendering. Counter-terror and anti-crime units have been seeding black market arms dealers with explosive-laced ammo. When fired, the bullets tend to have a small explodey effect on the weapons, rendering the weapon useless, and typically giving the user non-lethal but disfiguring hand and facial injuries. This bad ammo looks and feels like every other bullet that the dealer has sold, so the only solution is to stop using that arms dealer. Now you can't trust your existing arms dealer, and you have to find a new one that may or may not have tainted ammo or even be a Fed. In essence, it shuts down the entire illegal arms industry at the cost of about 1 or 2 crates of C4 bullets mixed in with the others. The Battle of Majnoon in the Iraqi-Iranian War. You wait until nighttime and you'll see how we're killing these Iranian dogs, an Iraqi officer said with a broad grin. We're frying them like eggplants. He then took us on a tour of dozens of thick electrical cables his troops had lain through the marshy battlefield, a spaghetti network that snaked in and out of the patchwork of lagoons. He showed us the mammoth electric generators that fed the exposed power lines from positions just behind the Iraqi front lines. And when the Iranian Revolutionary Guards made their regular evening advance, the officer and his men demonstrated the macabre genius of their invention. Iraqi gun batteries fired just enough artillery to force the Revolutionary Guards from their marsh boats, and when hundreds of them had been forced to continue their advance through the lagoons on foot, the men at the Iraqi generators flipped a few switches and sent thousands of volts of electricity surging through the marshland. Within seconds, hundreds of Iranians were electrocuted. This occurred nightly. In the trenches of France in World War I, General Monash was given the unenviable task of punching through the German line to claim the French town of Le Hamel. The way that Monash went about doing this was both revolutionary and bloody sneaky. The German forces were well equipped and well fortified, reinforced with heavy artillery and machine guns, and the troops were very well trained. Faced with those odds, Monash began to condition the German forces. Every day at dawn, he'd let loose a barrage of smoke bombs, followed by regular mustard gas canisters. The Germans, following their training, would equip themselves with gas masks which protected them. Monash kept up this bombardment for 2 weeks, and soon the Germans became accustomed to the pattern of attack, and would immediately don their gas masks and hunker down at the first sign of smoke. But on the dawn of the 4th of July, the smoke bombs were not followed by gas, but by Australians. The German gas masks protected them from the mustard gas and smoke, but they also vastly impeded their vision, hearing, and ability to communicate. With the noise of the battle and the obscuring smoke, they were deaf and blind on the battlefield. And to make things worse, this was not an unprotected infantry mass attack, but a creeping barrage supported by a division of tanks, heavy artillery, and aircraft. The tanks protected the vulnerable infantry, and the artillery and aircraft prevented the Germans from effectively deploying anti-tank measures. The battle was over in just 90 minutes and marked the rise of mixed arms warfare. Not sure if it's been posted yet or not, but the Ghost Army was a pretty great trick. Maybe not dirty, but still really clever and underhanded. The 1,100-man unit was given a unique mission within the Allied army to impersonate other Allied army units to deceive the enemy. From a few weeks after D-Day when they landed in France until the end of the war, they put on a traveling road show, utilizing inflatable tanks, sound trucks, fake radio transmissions, scripts, and pretense. They staged more than 20 battlefield deceptions, often operating very close to the front lines. Their story was kept secret for more than 40 years after the war, and elements of it remain classified. I think that's so frickin' cool. You had entire airfields full of fake planes and stuff, and Germany was running around going crazy over it, but it was all fake. So perfect. Plus the insignia is really cool. The narrator has naturally Googled this insignia, and it's a very cartoony ghost blasting lightning out of its hands. I don't know that it's the coolest one of the war, but it is very unique and memorable, and I think this kind of unit is a nice diversion from the atrocities we've been reading about, and we're sure to read more of them very shortly. Case in point, Genghis Khan, in a large-scale attack against the fortress at Volokhai, after being unable to breach the walls, demanded 1,000 cats and 10,000 Chinese swallows in exchange for lifting the siege. When the defenders sent out the animals, Genghis took them and tied tufts of cotton to their tails and ignited them, at which point the animals rushed back to their homes within the city, igniting hundreds of small fires, while Genghis's army attacked again and took the fortress amidst the panic. The Russians and their use of a scorched earth policy. I can't think of a better way to flip off your invaders than ruining all of your own stuff so that when they do take it, it's worthless. Not only that, but the land itself is just too damn cold. So go ahead, take the land. You'll just freeze to death. Congratulations. Before the Battle of Yorktown in the US Civil War, the Confederate General Magruder was able to convince McClellan that he had 40,000 troops manning his defenses rather than his actual force of 10,000. If I recall correctly, he found a point in the defenses where he knew his troops would be observed and counted, and marched them past that point several times. McClellan had 120,000 troops and superior artillery, but like always, he hesitated to attack even with superior numbers. He also thought that another general was approaching with 60,000 men, which is actually close to the actual number, and didn't want to attack Magruder's 40,000 and be hit by 60,000 as well. So he waited for his own reinforcements and more reconnaissance. If he had attacked Magruder, he would have overwhelmed him and been able to prepare for Johnston's arrival. Instead, he waited to attack until Magruder's forces were reinforced. Johnston arrived and added even more troops, and the Confederates were eventually able to slip away from the battlefield with only 300 casualties. In short, Magruder marched troops in a circle past his enemies, making 10,000 men look like 40,000, causing the cautious McClellan to hesitate and waste the opportunity. This is exactly what Russia did in 1955 with the Bear and Bison bombers, knowing that Western intelligence was likely to be watching the military parade through Red Square. They simply flew a single squadron in one large loop over the parade, giving the impression of having way more bombers than they actually had. Unfortunately for the Russians, the U-2 spy planes soon uncovered their actual numbers, but it was an extremely effective bluff in the short term. The British pulled a dirty trick during the African campaign in World War II. At every well and oasis they could find, they hung up a sign that said, "Danger! Poison!" in English and German. It was only when the Germans complained that poisoning wells was a war crime that the British pointed out that, yes, poisoning wells was a war crime, but merely hanging signs was not. The water was perfectly drinkable. On a similar note, how many mines does it take to make a minefield? One sign. I nominate the Vietnamese defeating the Chinese Han in 938 near Ha Long Bay, copying the relevant section from Wikipedia. By the time the Chinese general Liu Hongkao arrived in Vietnamese waters with the Southern Han expedition, Liu Hongkao's plan was to ascend the Vietnamese Bac Dang River and to place his army in the heart of Jacanato Chao before disembarking. The Bac Dang was the major riverine route into the Red River Plain from the north. The Vietnamese general Ngo Quyen anticipated this plan and brought his army to the mouth of the river. He had his men plant a barrier of large poles in the bed of the river. The tops of the poles reached just below the water level at high tide and were sharpened and tipped with iron. When Liu Hongkao appeared off the mouth of the river, Quyen sent out small, shallow-drafted boats at high tide to provoke a fight and then retreat upriver, drawing the Chinese fleet in pursuit. As the tide fell, the heavy Chinese warboats were caught on the poles and lay trapped in the middle of the river, whereupon they were attacked by Ngo Quyen's forces. If I recall correctly, this wasn't the only time the strategy was employed. I'd have to go back to my books, but I think it was used again in the 1200s. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Washington crossing the Delaware, sneaking into the Hessian camp while they were drunk, and celebrating Christmas. 3 American losses versus 22 losses on the Hessian side and 1,000 prisoners. Capture of their weapons, gunpowder, and supplies. So there's this kind of honey made in Turkey called mad honey. It's made from the pollen of rhododendron flowers. If you eat very much of it, you get very intoxicated, and you often hallucinate. You can even take a lethal amount of it. A few times in antiquity, it was used as a weapon of war. For example, the Persians left some of the Romans to find it. The Romans ate that sweet stuff right up, and the Persians attacked them while they were all tripping and defenseless. In the same way that he did his diligence about the Ghost Legion in his last comment, the narrator kind of feels inclined to track down a sample of this mad honey and try it for himself, purely for research purposes, of course. Saint-Nazaire was a heavily defended seaport during World War II. The British commandos disguised the destroyer HMS Campbelltown as a German destroyer and filled it with as much explosives as they could. They sailed the ship past the spotlights, signaling that their radio was broken using signal lights. Eventually, the Germans did catch on and opened fire on the ship, but too late. The Campbelltown lowered the Nazi flag, raised the Union Jack, and the ship rammed the dry dock at full speed. Sadly, the timer on the explosives was faulty and the dry dock was barely damaged. 2/3 of the commandos were killed or captured, and the mission was deemed an abysmal failure. However, 6 hours later, just as the commandos were being mocked by a Gestapo officer for the failed operations, the explosives went off, blew the entire dry dock to pieces, and put it out of commission for the rest of the war. Reportedly, there was much gloating among the British prisoners as in a matter of seconds, the operation went from an abysmal failure to one of the greatest successes in the history of the commandos. There's a great quote from the Forgotten Voices of the Second World War. Just before the Campbelltown exploded, Sam Beatty was being interrogated by a German naval officer who was saying that it wouldn't take very long to repair the damage the Campbelltown had caused. Just at that moment, she went up. Beatty smiled at the officer and said, "We're not quite as foolish as you think." Crac de Chevalier was a Crusader castle in Syria and one of the most important castles in the world with imposing walls and a very good defense. The castle was besieged by Sultan Baybars. This man conveyed a forged letter to the garrison, supposedly from the Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller in Tripoli, which granted permission for them to surrender. They did, and Baybar got the castle. The Turks had the Turan tactic. The army would formate into a crescent, with the arms of the crescent being the armoured, strong divisions, and middle front being the fastest divisions, and middle back being the highest firepower, the cannons. They'd start the battle lined up and charge, then the fast middle front guys would start retreating to the lines behind the middle back, the cannons. The arms of the crescent would hold firm because they were the armoured part. The enemy would think they were retreating completely, because it looks like they're losing their crap and their formation, and would chase after them only to be met with the cannons and to be encircled by the crescent's arms. It was a slaughter of the enemy after that. Back in the English Civil War, there was a certain nobility in battle where you were supposed to be able to see your opponent and you would stand and fight. Cromwell decided this was stupid and in numerous battles would send troops round the side, hidden by trees and bushes, to tear through the cavaliers before the fighting began properly. It was a lot dirtier trick at the time. I think the start of World War II, when the Führer made prisoners dressed like Polish soldiers and let them attack Germany so that Germany could run over Poland. Sneaky man. Also promising not to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia after being given all of their border defenses, then proceeding to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia basically unopposed. During the Siege of Kaffa, the Mongols hurled the corpses of the deceased soldiers decimated by the Black Plague into the besieged city. It's considered one of the key events that helped spreading the disease in Western Europe, killing millions. Not so much the dirtiest trick as one of the most hard-nosed decisions. The first V1 flying bombs, if you're under the age of 40, think first-generation cruise missiles, they were being launched by Germany against London, and they were hitting. They were area weapons, as accuracy was pretty much a mile on any side of the aiming point, but they were coming down in central London. Germany had no agents in Britain, not one. They thought they did, but every agent they sent over was caught and then either turned or eliminated, and the other agents were all fictitious, imaginary ones dreamed up in a British campaign of disinformation that was and is breathtaking. The government decided that they simply didn't want to risk the buildings and architecture and heritage of the heart of London, as quite a lot had been bombed out already. So the agents reported back to Berlin that the V1s were overshooting their target and coming down in North London. Fake stories planted in newspapers reinforced the deception. The Germans dutifully shortened the range, and the V1s knocked the crap out of areas of South London. One of the reasons why a lot of Croydon is 1960s concrete is because of the damage done by the V1s in 1944. Fun fact, the Germans spent more money on the V1 and V2 weapons program than the Americans spent on the Manhattan Project. In short, someone said, "Our people are going to die and our buildings are going to be flattened whatever happens, so let it be here." There is something just so very Churchill and Tory about this decision. No, for God's sake, don't let them destroy our monuments. At least let's redirect them into the suburbs where they can only hit poor people. Ah yes, that's better. Some of the USA's tricks during the Cold War to assassinate Fidel Castro were pretty mad. One idea attempted by the CIA included putting thallium salts into his shoes so that his beard, eyebrows, and body hair would fall out. It was considered that this would cause his downfall as no one would take him seriously after that. The US firebombed Tokyo because the houses were mostly made of wood. They knew the city would burn. Even the guy who drafted the plan, Robert McNamara, was ashamed of it. They also tried strapping thermite to bats and releasing them over Japan in the hope that they would roost in the houses, then go off and burn the houses down. The plan was cancelled after all the facilities where this was being tested burned down due to incendiary bats roosting in them. Lots of these will be fairly depressing. As dirty or sneaky tricks go, Operation Mincemeat was crafty. Or at least I'm looking for an excuse to post it. One April morning in 1943, a sardine fisherman spotted the corpse of a British soldier floating in the sea off the coast of Spain, setting in train a course of events that would change the course of World War II. Operation Mincemeat was the most successful wartime deception ever attempted, and certainly the strangest. It hoodwinked Nazi espionage chiefs, sent German troops racing in the wrong direction, and saved thousands of lives by deploying a secret agent who was different, in one crucial respect, from any spy before or since. He was dead. His mission? To convince the Germans that instead of attacking Sicily, the Allied armies would invade Greece. The brainchild of an eccentric RAF officer and a brilliant Jewish barrister, this great deception involved an extraordinary cast of characters including Ian Fleming, who would eventually go on to write the James Bond stories, also a famous forensic pathologist, a beautiful Secret Service secretary, a submarine captain, 3 novelists, an irascible admiral who loved fly fishing, and a dead Welsh tramp. Using fraud, imagination, and seduction, Winston Churchill's team of spies spun a web of deceit so elaborate and so convincing that they began to believe it themselves. From a windowless basement beneath Whitehall, the hoax travelled from London to Scotland to Spain to Germany and ended up on the German Chancellor's desk. There was a time of World War I called Live and Let Live. Both sides essentially refusing to fight and coming out of the trenches together and socializing. After the generals on one side, I think it was the British but I could be wrong, found out about this, they devised a dirty trick. The British lured the Germans out of their trench by playing a traditional German anthem and then cut them all down, thus ending the days of Live and Let Live. It was 184 BC. Hannibal was fighting King Eumenes of Pergamus, who had a superior naval fleet. Hannibal instructed his men to gather up all the snakes they could find and load them into earthen pots. He then sent a fake letter of peace over just to find out which ship was the king's. They focused their attacks on that ship while firing the pots at the fleet to distract them with poisonous snakes on their decks. Hannibal won that battle. I read somewhere about a high-ranking officer in the Chinese military that was infamous among enemies and allies for his cleverness and ability to come up with unique war tactics. During some war, the enemy army was marching towards some strategically valuable location. The general, knowing he couldn't let his army take the location, rode to a town that the army had to pass through to get there and set up his plan. As the enemy army approaches the town, they see this general, all alone, sitting on an arch above the entrance playing a flute. They turn right the frick around and abandon the plan, fearing some brutal and elaborate ambush. The general was bluffing. He was the only person there. The Black Dinner, which happened at Edinburgh Castle in 1440. Essentially, the real-life version of the Red Wedding. Olga of Kiev's entire campaign against the Drevlians. She had the first set of emissaries buried alive, had a second set locked in a bathhouse and then burned, then she invited a whole bunch more for a funeral feast and had them slaughtered while they were drunk. Then she just marched her soldiers over and took out the rest. Letting the Germans bomb Coventry so that the Germans wouldn't suspect that their codes were cracked and the British knew they were going to bomb Coventry. Maybe when Germany attacked the Soviet Union in 1941, Stalin was so furious and perhaps disappointed that he didn't do any public speeches or appearances for more than 2 weeks. War elephants basically mess everything up. There is one way to defeat them though. You slather some pigs in sticky flammable stuff, set them on fire and let them loose. This freaks the war elephants out and they become useless. What did your monster of a neighbor do? My monster neighbors? Well, I moved onto a dirt road with several houses on it. My friend has lived down the road his whole life. The people next to my house only came up for the summer and are never there for the winter. When summer comes, however, there's multiple potholes on the road. Curious, I asked my friend. He said the neighbors come up in the summer and dig the holes themselves in order to slow down traffic. So, yeah, that. My neighbor had 2 access roads to his property. He didn't live there, he just had livestock there, and he insisted on using the one that cut through our property despite the fact that it was actually the longer road, and it was a literal unpaved road through the woods. He didn't have an easement or anything, he just assumed that since he had to drive through our property to get to that crappy lane, he was allowed to do so. He was also a total jerk to us for no reason. He never said hi, he got upset if we were too close to his property, despite the fact that he literally drove through ours every day. Revenge came when lightning struck a tree in our woods and it fell right across the access to the lane road, on our property. He hired a service to chop the tree up and told them that they could have the wood as part of the payment. It was some very nice walnut. My dad wasn't having any of that. He walked down with a copy of the sale documents, pointed out the marker that clearly separated our land from our jerk neighbor's land, and got the neighbor to admit that the tree in question was both from our land and currently laying on our land, not the neighbor's. And then my dad sent the crew packing and told them if they took so much as a branch from that tree, it was theft, and he, a lawyer, would see them in court for it. It's been over 15 years and that tree is still laying across the access to the lane road. He can still access his property via the other road, so he didn't have a leg to stand on to force an easement. Screw you, Jim. Ugh. My upstairs neighbor, who, long story short, got super heated about how I didn't see him in the hallway and say hi one time, and then blamed his outburst on the fact that laundry makes him cranky. He drunkenly tried to get into my apartment last afternoon and then asked if I had a problem with him. When I explained that his behavior made me uneasy, he called me passive-aggressive, and then said that everyone forgets where they live sometimes and he had forgotten where his apartment was because he was humming as he walked up the stairs. It must be so paralyzing to be that allergic to admitting fault. Well, there's a lot more going on with that guy than just hating being wrong. There are any number of things that could be analyzed by a specialist for hours, I'd wager. What an aggressive weirdo. My neighbor would chant "eggplant-sucking witch" over and over every time I'd do basic things like close the door or take a shower. He'd chant hard enough for me to hear through the wall of my apartment. I was far from being loud. That guy just had so many issues. I got sick of it and called over the landlord. The landlord tried closing one door and the creep started chanting again. My landlord went over right then and threatened to kick him out if he didn't stop. Luckily, it worked. I don't live there anymore, but I still remember it vividly. My neighbors neglected their daughter to the point that she'd sneak into our house and steal food from our kitchen. Child Protection Services were called. For some context, I grew up in a rural area on a fairly big property. It had been a large farm that got parceled out as the owner aged. So there were 4 3/4 acre lots and my parents 10 acres behind them. The house was relatively far away from our neighbors. One of the neighbors was an absolute piece of crap. When I was 8, I remember seeing the police lights at his door. Found out when I was a bit older that he had tried to murder his father over his oxy prescription. His father owned the house and the 30-year-old kid lived there rent-free. The kid did a few years in jail, then moved back in with his father who he had tried to kill. He grew green herb on our land and then threatened to kill my mother when my father and I tore it down. But he didn't call the cops. Frequently threatened to attack or kill my mother. I can remember multiple times when I was younger, him banging on our door and screaming threats at my mum. Other times I can remember thinking about the shotty in my father's office, in case our neighbor actually got inside the house. This was 8 to 10 times a year, occurring from my age 8 through 14. He's calmed down a little after a second arrest and some anger management classes. Nowadays, he just has massive bonfires with tons of loud music, and he leaves empties on our property, which is still a jerk move, but better than physical intimidation and death threats. Jerry. When I moved in, he seemed eccentric but harmless. Apparently, my landlord had a conversation with him and told him to leave me alone. This upset Jerry greatly. He cornered me one day while I was unlocking my door and asked me to come sit with him in his apartment. I don't think the place had ever been cleaned, and he had hoarder mentalities. He drank a bottle of wine in about 30 minutes, commenting on all of the sad things in his life. Luckily, he passed out so I could leave. A couple of weeks later, he got into a 3 a.m. fight with his boyfriend, which resulted in his boyfriend trying to get into my apartment for safety and eventually breaking into an empty unit down the hall. Cops were called and Jerry was taken to jail. About a week after that, the same boyfriend was over and a fight ensued. This time, it ended with them doing the deed very loudly. Jerry would flush things you're not supposed to flush down the toilet and would back up the sewage into mine and my neighbor's bathtubs and bathroom sinks. Eventually, he clogged his toilet so badly that he just ripped it from the wall and left it there. The cops came twice to my door to ask if I had seen Jerry lately and asked to search my apartment to make sure I wasn't hiding him. One day, while I was getting ready for work, he came into my apartment with another guy and tried to measure my walls for the renovation he was going to do to combine his and my apartments into one unit. But don't worry, he said, I could just live with him when it was finished. Eventually, Jerry got evicted, but he'd still convince people to let him into the building. For months, his mugshot was pasted on all entrances, saying to not let him in. My neighbor was both a monster and so very dumb. She lived upstairs and was trying to force me to move out, so she put her speakers on her floor pointing straight down and blared them at full volume. The instant it started, I leapt up in outrage at her audacity, but after a few seconds I realized, I really like this song. So I gave it one song, and as it's winding down, I prepare my outrage once again, only to be choked off when the next song is also a perennial favorite. I didn't even bother getting upset before I realized I liked the third song as well. She stopped at midnight when she was legally required to, and then apparently realized she wasn't getting much bang for her buck as far as irritating me went for effort on her part, so she didn't try it anymore. Mine ripped up and threw away my mum's sweet pea plant that she got from her friend who died of cancer. When she complained, the neighbor started ranting about how our garden is a disgrace and an embarrassment to the neighborhood, and we need to replace all the grass and plants with concrete. What a jerk. You know, I'm pretty sure Sundays are for my upstairs neighbors to suplex their children and push over bookcases. Same. I've got a 90-pound woman and a 3-year-old daughter living alone above me, and they apparently wear their cinder block shoes in the house. His dog went through our trash and got sick. The dog ended up needing to go to the vet, and he told me when he bumped into me at my old job, yeah, it was like $5,000 to get her back to health. You're lucky I don't bill you guys. Mind you, this guy let his dog go through everyone's yard and crap wherever it wanted. It's not like the dog escaped, he just willingly didn't care. The last time I saw him, the cops were in his driveway because of an apparent domestic incident. My lovely local lunatic disappeared for hours a day to kill cats and attacked someone at the local park. He used to stand on the footpath drunk every afternoon and yell at my husband about what a B-word I was. Once my husband told him to go home and he shaped up to try and punch my husband, who was about 50 years younger than the neighbor. What was my infraction, you ask? Well, he rang one day to be nosy and ask why my husband's car was home on a workday. I politely thanked him for his call and let him know my husband was sleeping and had a cold. Nothing to worry about. Apparently, I was meant to praise him profusely for being such a caring neighbor, and my husband was meant to follow up with a call once he was awake and also lavish him with praise for caring. Because we didn't do this, we got to hear about it loudly every afternoon until we moved several months later. Yes, I mean, as the saying goes, a good deed is not its own reward. The reward is everyone on the block lining up to give you a down-under kiss and tell you what a wonderful person you were. What a bored old codger. Get a hobby, dude. They yelled at me for entering a shared garage to get some of our stuff. Later claimed I was after his piece, which was stored in a weapon locker with a lock that only he had the key for. They were in their 60s or 70s at the time, though, and died last year. Mine screamed obscenities through the wall at my children because they were apparently talking too loudly in the middle of the day, then screamed at us through the walls in the middle of the night so we could see how it felt to be disturbed, regularly dumped his old food out of his bathroom window onto our shared backyard. A rodent infestation took place shortly thereafter. Then stopped paying rent to our landlord because he felt the landlord should have warned him that he might be able to hear his neighbors. Finally dumped his trash on our shared front porch. The landlord did not renew his lease, took him to court, got his unpaid rent money back plus additional payment for damages to the apartment. It was glorious vindication. Mine really partied too hard. As I got home from work one evening, I saw the neighbor chuck a beer bottle at one cop, then throw a punch at the other. Things didn't go well for him after that. I found out after the fact that someone had called a noise complaint because it was something like 11 p.m. on a weekday. This neighbor was a double jerk, though. He had moved off campus with a pair of guys from his frat. The other two guys were cool. We had him over for grilling and vice versa. The guy who got arrested not only screwed himself, but caused so many issues that the other two guys who were on the lease got blacklisted by pretty much every place in town as well. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. One of them was a cowboy builder who even conned his elderly next-door neighbors into getting their roof done for 10 grand, even though their tiles were almost brand new. He then took all of their tiles to retile his own roof for free and put about 10% of his old crappy tiles on their roof and then abandoned the project completely. Don't worry though, we got him arrested and he had to sell his house to pay back his victims, although the cost of his house didn't even come close to covering the full costs. Another neighbor we had would stand in his back garden really early in the morning and then start shooting local birds with a crossbow when they woke up, and he put the bodies in regular bin bags and left them in the street, where foxes ripped them open and dragged dead birds all over the place. Now we have no songbirds in the area. It all started by letting her kids and animals run wild in my backyard. So I dropped about $5,000 on a 6-foot privacy fence that my father-in-law and I built. Then this lady had her water turned off for lack of payment and began taking her number 2s in plastic bags and throwing them over my fence. When confronted about it, she kindly denied and then took to social media. Here's a transcript of her Facebook rant, by the way, and let me stress that although this is an audio thing, on the written letter there are maybe about 1/3 of the words actually spelt right. WTF, just because you find a bag of crap in your yard, you automatically come to frickin' me? Why? 'Cause I'm not like the rest of you snobby rich mother frickers who likes to talk about ya behind your back, but kind of be neighborly to your face or really not even that. What, 'cause I'm a little wilder, younger, tattoos and piercings and black hair? Better watch it might cast a fricking spell on ya, and so what if I got people coming at night or morning, vice versa. Hell, witch can't even get her freak on, damn. And what just 'cause my yard ain't mowed every 2 days or every weekend, and I'm not spick and span, I got kids and doing by myself everything, so don't expect crap to be perfect. 'Cause that's what you think you are. I'm not rich and I ain't poor. I live life day by day and God put us here to love and be nice to each other, do the right neighborly thing, but no go to have the nose stuck in the air. Snobby judging motherfrickers like yourself, and everybody's day will come and he will judge 'cause he can, and is the only one I think I should F you and every other law-bidden citizen bullcrap. Suck my eggplant B-word. Wow. So, I called the landlord and had an eviction notice served the next day. Last year, my neighbor said he'll bash me because I got his driveway wet while I had the sprinkler going to water my yard. I'm not even joking, he flipped out over his driveway getting water on it. He's a substance addict, so yeah. I mean, he must rage every time it rains. Literally, old man yells at cloud. Mine use our trash bin and ram it full of bags of their gross nappies. I so badly want to take the bags out and leave them on their doorstep. Please allow me to vent because I'm in the throes of this BS at the moment. First, they have 4 mini dachshunds that never shut the frick up. I can't even open my back door without these little dogs going off, and they just leave them outside all day, every day. I enjoy sitting outside on a nice day and reading, but nope, I can't concentrate over the ear-splitting constant yapping. Now, I'm a dog person. I own dogs and love dogs, but this complete lack of consideration is mind-boggling. Second, they rent, and I own, but the crazy wife told me that she owns a 3-foot strip of my property and they'll be moving the fence over. I don't have a huge yard, 3 feet is a lot of space. And did I mention they rent? I brought out my survey to say, no, you don't own it, and no, you aren't going to be moving the fence. And she continued to say that they had their own survey but refused to show it to me. Third, they seem to think it's no big deal if they come into my yard. I came home from work to find they'd moved their water drainage into my backyard. They'd complained about my tree and asked me to cut it down. I said no. They put their garbage cans in my driveway. I've witnessed the wife empty her vacuum cleaner in my driveway. She's blown piles of leaves that haven't even come from my tree into my driveway. Even after I put locks on my gate, she climbed up on a ladder, leaned over the fence and leaf blew all of the leaves in my yard and that were already in piles all over my yard. After that, I put up cameras and I have future plans to press charges for trespassing the next time this crazy witch pulls another stunt. She accused me of calling the police about her daughter's illegal car. I didn't. And then said that I put up a note complaining about her garage. Again, I didn't. She's called the health department multiple times on me for my grass being too long. It wasn't. And the health department didn't cite me. Listen, all I want to do when I come home after a day at work is hang out with my dogs and not fricking talk to anyone or deal with any crap. I don't know what to do about this lady. It's like all these little things she does just toe the line at illegal, and I feel like if I call the police, they're just going to look at it as a petty neighbor squabble instead of harassment. And yes, I've been in touch with the landlord. I completely cut off all contact with the neighbors, and I will now only talk to the landlord. The landlord himself is extremely accommodating and addressed the water drainage thing. The thing is, they're awful neighbors, but apparently they're not bad tenants. They keep their property very clean and tidy and do a lot of work on the house. She's just out of her gosh darn mind. Damn it! At least these awful people usually have the consideration to be equally awful to everyone, so that when the first complaint is lodged, everyone else they've annoyed comes out of the woodwork as well. These absolute monsters might be harder to dislodge. Oh my god, frick these people. I hate them. Busted by SWAT last summer. I had to call into work because of the barricades. There were no arrests, and I never really got the story on that. While we live in houses, we don't have fences around the backyard. They got a dog. They used to sit on their porch while the dog roamed the neighborhood. Then they'd just let him out to roam the neighborhood while in their house. In the winter, they'd put on a coat and leave him out for hours. Then they'll stand on their porch screaming, "Pete! Pete!" forever at 11 p.m. Pete has disappeared. I think someone else in the neighborhood took him in. Now they have another puppy named Zero. He's probably about 12 weeks and of course is wandering the neighborhood. We can hear them screaming the hell out of each other. So can people across the street. Police are out at least once a week arresting one of them, then they bail each other out. They've borrowed jumper cables and never returned them, then came over last week asking for jumper cables. My boyfriend told them that we already loaned them to him and they weren't returned. The neighbors then told us they were going to sue us for accusing them of thievery. Oh, and then there was the lawnmower saga. Last summer, they came over and asked to borrow our riding lawnmower. My boyfriend currently works more than 75 hours a week during summer, and the one thing that he despises is lawn work. So he made a deal. The neighbor can borrow our lawnmower anytime he needs it, as long as he mows our lawn each and every single time. That went smoothly for all of 3 weeks. The neighbor comes over and tells us that we need a new battery and that 2 of the blades are dull. Clearly, beggars can be choosers in his eyes. Whatever, my boyfriend goes out and spends money on a new battery and new blades for the mower. However, after doing that, the lawnmower just sat. My boyfriend absolutely hates leaving personal property out. He goes next door and tells the neighbor that the lawn needs to be mowed soon and that there was an agreement, and the neighbor isn't standing by his part. We get the usual sob story about how he's sick, blah blah blah. Boyfriend tells him that we're leaving tomorrow on a Sunday and we'll be back the following Monday afternoon, and that when he gets back he wants the lawn mowed. If the neighbor can't do it, my boyfriend will just mow our lawn and be done with it. The neighbor tells us that he's definitely going to do it. Well, no. We got back Monday and the grass was growing around the lawnmower because it was never moved. Boyfriend got straight out of his truck, mowed our lawn, leaving the perfect line between our property and theirs, and locked the mower up in the shed. Neighbor comes over 2 days later going on and on about how he was just about to do it. Boyfriend says that no, obviously he wasn't. He had 8 days to do it. It never got done, and why is he coming over after 2 days after we've locked it up? They ended up getting a ticket a few days later for the grass being too tall. They still never mowed it or took care of it. The city came out, mowed their lawn, and left them a hefty bill for it. They tried telling us it was our responsibility to pay it because we, quote, took away their opportunity to be self-sufficient. Rang my doorbell at 4 a.m. over and over and asked me to go with him because there was an emergency and it was important. I went with him and he took me over to his car and started asking what I thought of it and looked very proud. In other words, this guy rang every apartment in the building at 4 a.m. to get people to look at his new car. One of my fellow tenants in a shared house at university. Each was a self-contained apartment with a bathroom, kitchen, and bedroom. The guy started smoking green herb, which I had no issue with, but as I was studying law and frequently met with police as part of my criminal justice module, I requested he keep it to his room rather than the communal areas of the house. He obliged, initially. I then went home for winter break, and upon returning I found lines of white snow half done on the kitchen counter, even with a rolled-up £10 note and the semi-empty bag. I stayed clear, and later that night, at 2 a.m., heard a knock on the door. A guy with blood dripping from his head was standing there shouting, "Rob! Get your butt out here! You've ripped me off!" Turns out his habit had progressed to dealing, and his supplier, to whom he owed a cut, was the blood-soaked man on my doorstep barging his way in. On a near-daily basis, he throws temper tantrums, yelling, stomping, and throwing tools, slamming doors, and screaming at his family over some petty nonsense. He's a crappy person, I feel bad for his family, and I'm genuinely annoyed each time I hear his voice. Landlords. Who are your tenants from hell? When I was a little kid, my parents bought a cheap house in a neighboring town and fixed it up to rent. 2 young women moved in, and they were great. Just out of college, working entry-level, and kind of getting by, no trouble. They called at 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve because there was a spider. My dad called back when we got home from church service and asked them what they wanted him to do. They said they wanted him to kill it. So he went out on Christmas Eve to kill their spider. They seemed to think that this was normal, like about on par with what you'd expect your landlord to do if your water pipes burst on Christmas Eve. It was the least he could do given the situation. It's not a tenant from hell story by any stretch, but it does make me laugh. He told me that I wasn't allowed to move out until I could kill my own spiders, because screw that. Oh, I have a couple of tenant from hell stories. In 2007, an older couple decided to quit paying their rent, but they had pretty good excuses, so I didn't evict them until after 3 months of not paying. Finally went down to the courthouse to file an unlawful detainer on them. We finally had our day in court. The female, who was usually dressed nicely with fake nails and an expensive weave, showed up looking like an old hag. The guy was using a walker, which made me eye-roll. This motherfricker didn't need one. And they claimed I was a slumlord and never fixed anything, but I had receipts from every repair, including a new AC unit. After I got the judgment against them, I tried to garnish the man's wages. They'd told me he worked for the Coca-Cola company. Turns out that company had never heard of him, but after a little digging I found out they'd both been arrested for selling something with a very similar name, but in a white powdery form. The officer showed me mugshots dating back to the early 80s. On their way out, they also stole the refrigerator. And then there was this past summer. I had a family of 7 move into a 5-bedroom house. They paid their deposit and the first month's rent. That's it. Haven't seen another dime from them. To top it off, they didn't get the power switched to their name, so I got more than a $400 power bill. About a month ago, I called the water company. Turns out they never had the water turned on, so they've been stealing water too. The water company pulled the meter. I'll be the one paying to have it put back. When I gave a 24-hour notice to do a walkthrough with police present, the woman answered the door and told me, "You can't come in and we'll get out when you follow all the procedures and the sheriff kicks us out." You know, I think they've done this before. Oh boy, that second group is hard for me to villainize, to be honest, because they were likely quite desperate to be resorting to back-to-back squatting with that many kids. Still, and I can't believe I'm saying this, you can't blame the landlord for kicking them out. Yes, I'm doing this video to try and get the perspective from the other side, and yes, in regular life I still err on siding with the tenants when there's any doubt. My dad owns quite a few apartment buildings throughout Colorado. One summer while I was in college, he was between managers for one of his 80-unit properties, so I acted as the stand-in manager until he hired a new one. I can't say she was the worst tenant per se, but I definitely have a few stories surrounding one woman who we'll call Kate. One day we were served a notice that Kate was taking us to the small claims court. Why? Because her in-unit washing machine wasn't working. Had she reported the problem to management? No. The maintenance man and I entered the unit that afternoon to fix the washing machine. What was the problem, you ask? It was unplugged. In the same summer, my dad woke me up at 2 a.m. saying the local police department is at the apartment on a shots fired report. When I arrive at the place, it's lit up like Christmas with squad cars. There must have been like 20 officers at the scene. What prompted the call? Kate and her bimbo friend were walking back from bars hammered. They heard 2 loud pops and decided someone was firing at them. What had actually happened? 2 guys launched a bottle rocket from a nearby balcony. Also worth noting that this happened on the 4th of July. The unit that Kate lived in was townhouse style, with the first floor consisting of 1 car garage and a staircase leading up to the living area. My dad's manager was posting a few available units on Craigslist when they happened upon another curious posting. Kate had posted the garage for rent on Craigslist under the premise that somebody could live in the garage and they'd be able to come upstairs to use the kitchen and restroom. The manager immediately marched over there to notify Kate that her posting violated the lease, which specified no subletting, and the Colorado Housing Code, which specifies a maximum occupancy of 2 people per bedroom plus 1. Kate lived in a bedroom with her husband and child. Kate was unable to comprehend what the manager was saying. She just kept repeating, "But think of all the extra money we could make each month." My dad said she couldn't simply wrap her head around the fact that her idea would be violating a legally binding agreement and the state housing code. They had to get her husband involved to have her remove the post. Kate called us on Christmas Eve one year complaining that the heat wouldn't turn on. My dad's a good guy and doesn't mess around with things like tenants being without heat, so he immediately got up from the holiday dinner with extended family to go and fix her problem. What was the issue? The breaker for the HVAC system was flipped. Some other entertaining stories from when I was growing up. When I was young, my dad owned 3 duplexes in a row. One winter, around 1995 I believe, he noticed that the energy bill for one of the units was exorbitantly higher than the other units. He was curious about their energy consumption and paid a visit to the property one day while the tenant was at work. I clarified with my dad about this, and he did give the tenant notice 24 hours prior that he was coming to perform an annual check of the fire alarms. He entered the basement and stumbled upon hydroponics galore. He said that there were over 30 green herb plants, each with their own UV lamp and watering system. While that particular herb is legal in Colorado now, it certainly wasn't back in '95. He told the tenant that he'd be entering the basement in 2 days with a maintenance man to perform routine boiler maintenance. When he returned in 2 days, the plants and hydroponics system were gone. Growing up, my dad always told me that you could identify a grow house from a mile away because it was the only house on the block that didn't have snow on its roof. He also leased 2 or 3 units from that 80-unit apartment to the local Mormon church. The idea was that the church would house their missionaries in my dad's units while they completed their mission. As a result, the apartment inhabitants would rotate every year or so. Well, one rotation, my dad had a particularly un-Mormon batch of Mormon missionaries. This batch threw rages so loud that the noise could be heard 4 buildings away. They were also known to frequent the local escort services and associated substance scene. As you may imagine, my dad had quite the uphill battle to fight when it came to addressing the missionaries' extracurricular indiscretions with the Mormon church. I do believe he eventually did successfully evict them, though. He's also buddies with one of the local mailmen. Whenever he has a tenant that screws him over by trashing their apartment or moving out in the middle of the night, the mailman will tell my dad their new address. My dad gives the mailman a gift certificate for a steak restaurant and a nice bottle of whiskey for Christmas every year. They've had this arrangement for about 10 years. This happened to my friend's rental. This one tenant gets evicted, and instead of trashing the place, they cut off chunks of drywall, put dead fish in the walls, and seal it all back up. The tenant was a carpenter. The owners couldn't figure out the smell for weeks. They repainted, got it professionally cleaned a few times, and searched endlessly. Eventually, they figured something died in the walls and started knocking holes in them. Turned out to be that piece of crap move by the tenant. I had a tenant remove the kitchen island and bring it outside by the pool because they needed an outdoor serving area. The narrator couldn't find confirmation of what material said island was made of or how extensive the work was to get it outside, because that's potentially a whole ton of work just to move outside a mostly wooden island that would get destroyed by the weather. These tenants are more stupid than malicious, though. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I have a crazy, manipulative tenant. She looks after the place well, but I wonder if my psychological damage is worth it. Early on in the tenancy, she complained about the shower curtain sticking to her. It's a shower-over-bath setup, and since she pays her rent reliably and keeps the place clean, we thought, oh okay, what the hell, and we paid to have a glass screen put in. We specifically instructed that the glass screen go in front of the shower head, as any sane person would, and after it's installed, I get a complaint from her about how she has to turn the shower head 45 degrees to stop the water hitting the ground. I go to inspect and find that the glass is inexplicably at the other end of the bath. Turns out she had insisted that the installer ignore our instructions and put it there for whatever fricking reason I don't know. I told her that since she had countermanded our instructions on something we were paying for, that it was now a permanent fixture in our property, that she was lucky we didn't charge her for it, and that she was going to have to live with the setup she had insisted on. She asked if she could put a cat flap in the back door. We agreed on the provision that she pay for it herself. See, we're learning. We also insisted that it be a proper cat flap, not some home dodgy version. She puts in a rubber cat flap door, which I personally wouldn't have gone with, but whatever, she's happy, so we let it go. Little did we know what that was leading towards. After the first winter in the house, she emails us copies of her electrical bills and says that the house needs better heating because her bills are too high. Looking at the bills, we agree that the house must need better heating, and we invest in a 7-kilowatt Daikin split system. She tries to tell us where to put it, and we tell her that the installers have designated this one spot as the most effective, and that we're not open to alternatives. We instruct the installers to refuse to shift the unit, see, we're still learning, unless they deem it to be superior, because she's not paying for the damn thing, we are. After the installation, the installer says to us, hey, just to let you know, the reason her bills are so high last year is that she pulled the cat flap into the open position and left it hooked up that way all winter. She created a deliberate hole between the inside and outside and left it fully open for an entire season, and then complained that her heating wasn't effective, also that she could score an expensive new heater that wasn't required. At this point I started thinking, is she really that manipulative? Would anyone deliberately freeze themselves just to make me fork out thousands of dollars for new heating? Is it really that important to her to screw me over for no purpose? Surely not. Surely not. Next, she asked permission to get a dog. We said yes. She then told us she had purchased a puppy and it would be ready in 3 months, but oh hey, that side fence needs replacing or else he'll get out. The fence probably would have needed replacing within 7 or so years anyway, so we figure, okay, that's probably not entirely unreasonable, and we agree. We're not keen on the way she's manipulated things by getting us to agree to a pet and then using that to pressure us, but we take the attitude that if we get the fencing job over with now, it's done and won't be a problem later. Then she says that the neighbors are substance users, and so she wants the fence extended down the driveway to stop them hovering near her car. We see her point, the neighbors are definitely criminals and constantly in trouble with the police. So fair enough, we think, and say that we'll be looking into doing that as well. Then the neighbors were evicted a few days later, hurrah! And social services put the house up for sale. We put the fence on hold until the sale goes through. A nice bloke buys the house and starts renovating it for his family. Great guy. We replaced the fence at our expense and he helped with the labor. However, we're not learning fast enough. In fact, we're total fricking idiots because it seems that now she's not getting that dog after all. The dog ploy was sufficient to get the fence replaced, and now there's no dog necessary. She has a shiny new fence, but she's not happy. No, she wants that fence extension put in. But, we point out, the new guy is a quiet family man and no threat to anyone. There's no need for a fence extension, so we'll not be putting one in. You have a brand new fence, be happy. She is not happy. She sends me a text about a week later saying that she really needs the fence extension put in because, and I quote, the police are all over and there's dead bodies in the street. As you can imagine, I'm floored by this. Aside from the now long-evicted ferals, the house is in a nice street mostly populated by retirees. It's not by a long stretch any kind of ghetto. I ring the new neighbor to confirm, and he says that no, there's no police anywhere, and that street is, as usual, quiet. He questions whether perhaps my tenant is schizophrenic. God knows. Maybe. I think it's more likely she's just compulsively manipulative because she's got a very clear endgame in all of this, and she's showing remarkable dedication to coming up with complete bullcrap to achieve it. But anyway, back to the police in the streets and dead bodies everywhere issue. Turns out there was an accidental carbon monoxide death of 2 people on a boat moored at the nearby bay, and police were attending the accident. No crime, nothing but a tragedy a couple of blocks away, which was being attended to very respectfully by the authorities. I tell her that no fence extension is going to be forthcoming. End of story. Or so I think. A few weeks later, she tells me that she needs the fence extension because the neighbor's gate keeps swinging into her driveway and hitting her car. I pop around to speak with the neighbor because God knows I don't trust a single word that comes out of the tenant's mouth, and while I'm there, he demonstrates that, lo, the gate cannot in any way enter her driveway, even in a gale, even if he swung it really hard. It can't enter here or there, it can't enter anywhere on her property, because the gate is inset from the end of the fence, and there's literally no way for it to swing past that point. At this stage, I told her through gritted teeth that I've spoken with the neighbor and that her car is safe from his gate. In the 3 years she's been with us, she hasn't had a rental increase, and she's always paid substantially under the market rate, because it was more important to me to get someone who looked after the property than to get the best price for it. However, I think the very next time that I get some made-up psychotic bullcrap from her that's designed to manipulate me into yet another expensive and unnecessary upgrade, her rent is going to suddenly go up to market rates. If I have to put up with any more of her crap, by gosh, she's going to start paying for it. And if it means that she moves on and I take my chances with a new person, then so be it. I've already checked with the tenancy tribunal here, and I could put up the rent by $50 a week to match the market rate without them so much as blinking. And that's just to make it market comparable with the houses that don't have new fences and expensive heating. She's gone radio silent for a few months now. I hope that maybe she's finally worked out that she's on a ridiculously sweet deal and should quit while she's massively ahead. Okay, so that, my friends, is what it looks like when one tenant has enough issues to fill up nearly a third of our video's runtime. Ridiculously patient landlord. I thought I'd forever be on the side of tenants in these kinds of situations, but it just goes to show that some landlords really do go through hell just trying to be decent managers. My mum had some tenants in a rental property who apparently were serial crap sacks and would live in a place until they got evicted, then move on to the next place. They'd do things like not pay rent while claiming the AC was broken or some other property-related issue, and then avoid actually letting it be examined or fixed. Long story short, after getting evicted, they waited until the very last minute to move out, left a bunch of their stuff behind, and filled a microwave with hot dogs which they left to rot. While my mum was in the process of getting a court order, the TV show Hot Bench, a Judge Judy spin-off, called and asked them to come on. Everyone got flown out to LA, and my mum got her money, and the crapsacks got berated on national daytime TV. So I suppose it worked out in the end. A tenant rented an apartment that didn't come with a parking space. An apartment in the building that did come with a parking space became available. He asked if he could have it. I told him it would be an extra amount per month, and he then started posting propaganda all over the property about the injustices that I supposedly committed for not giving him a parking space for free. He tried to get other tenants to sign a petition that would make me give up my parking space on the property. He then took us to court. He lost, but not without just a freaking nightmare of his crap personality and sociopathic tendencies. The most annoying aspect of it all was the fact that he was this bullcrap hippie dude who was all about peace and positive vibes and teaching yoga and stuff. Wrong him though, and he was the most toxic human being you'll ever meet. I used to have a job that involved cleaning and minor repairs of rental apartments and houses between tenants. Usually it was easy enough, but the ones who were evicted often made it a point to wreck the place on the way out. One particular jerk decided to pack plumber's putty into the sink and bathtub drains, and then turn the taps on before he left. They had to get professional contractors to fix most of it, but I got to rip out a bunch of stinky wet carpet and water-damaged floorboards. My parents had some tenants when I was probably 7 or 8 that never paid the rent, and they wound up getting evicted. My parents decided that they'd save some money and we'd just clean the place up ourselves. This was their worst idea ever. I didn't know what a lot of the stuff I saw that day was until much later in life. The first thing I saw when we walked in the door was a fish tank full of dead exotic fishies. In the bedroom, we found used bedroom protection, sanitary products, and needles, like just lying around. Once we saw that bedroom, my parents gave up and hired a professional cleaner, but I heard what else they found. They found a cat shoved into the toilet of the master bathroom. It was terrible. I used to work in lettings. We had a young couple move into a house. They were young and were using benefits to pay their rent, but the landlord wanted to give them a chance. 2 months later, we got a call from a locksmith contracted by the police. The police had raided the house the night before because the young man was a dealer. They had literally smashed the front door frame out of the wall, and the locksmith had been called in to make good. We called the girl. The young man was in police custody, and she couldn't afford the rent and wanted out of both the tenancy and the relationship. We made a house visit to check the state of the door. It was pretty bad. They had a dog in a house with a no pets policy, and it had been shut in a bedroom a lot. Turds and chew marks and scratch marks everywhere. They'd smoked a bunch, we had a no smoking policy, and the house stunk of stale cigarettes. The landlord agreed to let them out of the tenancy and get the house back on the market. It cost thousands to put the house right. New front door, redecorate, all new carpets. It was just about ready to advertise when we had a call from the neighbor. There had been a disturbance the night before and he'd had to call the cops. The young man, being released from police custody and unable to get back with his girlfriend, had broken back into the property a couple of days earlier to squat. He had then had a visit from his supplier he owed a lot of money to. His supplier ended up attacking him. He almost bled to death on the brand new cream carpets. Once we had got more new carpets in and fixed the broken window from where he'd broken in, we found a new, reputable tenant. A nice young man who was actually a substance counselor. Which turned out to be good because a lot of the local users didn't get the memo about their dealer being arrested and then attacked. So he had a lot of visitors in the beginning and knew how to deal with them. There was also a single mum with some pretty serious issues who tried to burn the house down. Luckily, they all got out alive and she got help. And finally, another guy threatened to attack me because he owed rent and couldn't pay, and I made him feel guilty. He got a visit from the cops, what with me knowing where he lived and all. But my favorite story was the tenants who lost their postbox key. The landlord posted them a new one. 2-bedroom unit rented to 2 girls, grown women mind you, with jobs. They complained that there were roaches. The previous tenant had had no roach problems. We'd even cleaned it and seen none. So we get it taken care of, and they still complained they were there. Now, we're thinking she or her roommate brought them. Skip to them both leaving on October 31st. We get the key and check the unit. It's trashed. They left behind a bunch of bottles on the counter, glasses, plates, cutlery, clothes, shoes, food just all over the place, and roaches. Lots of roaches. We called the junk removers. They don't remove unless it's roach-free. So we called pest control. They advised to remove things before they do their jobs. Frick my life. My parents have owned properties for a while, so there's a number, but the one that I'm personally invested in is the last tenant. They decided to rent out my childhood home, and I suggested it to a coworker. I'd worked with this woman for several years and thought she and her family were decent people. I trusted them. They brought bed bugs into the place, did quite a bit of damage to the walls, and also pulled out and sold the 100-year-old hardwood trim. They removed the central air unit and sold it, and just generally messed the place up. They then proceeded to skip town after being kicked out once they found out that their wages were being garnished. Show up to your court dates, kids. Having tenants leave behind a pile of trash, horrifying bathrooms, and holes in the walls is common, but I hold a bit of a grudge on this one specifically. Americans. What makes you glad that you don't live in Europe? In America, I'm really glad that almost everything is open on Sundays. I lived in Germany for a few months and didn't plan groceries right that first weekend. Grocery store was closed. I didn't have anything to eat, so I walked into town to find a restaurant, and the only thing open was Pizza Hut. I don't even like Pizza Hut when I'm in the US. So the narrator's first video on this channel was things that outsiders find really weird about the States. So, in the spirit of fairness, let's see if we hold up over here under the scrutiny of our friends from across the pond. Let us have it, Americans. Being a second-generation Ukrainian, one thing America has that Ukraine doesn't is a societal norm to not drive or park on the sidewalks. As someone who's been to Greece quite a few times, Greek drivers, holy crap, they do whatever they feel like on the road whenever they feel like it. Things closing really early. I was at a coffee shop doing homework when studying abroad. By about 3, they came up to me and kicked me out since they were about to close. In the US, coffee shops are often open pretty late for people to study in, so that was weird to me. Other than that, I think living in Europe would be wonderful. It's been years since I've been to Europe. Hell, the last time I was there was before places in the States started banning smoking. But I do remember a ton of smoking there. I know this isn't all of Europe, but I'm glad that in the States we don't have those taps that have 2 separate spouts for hot and cold, with 2 faucets. They just seem like such an inconvenience. Nothing quite like washing your hands as fast as you can under the hot tap before the water reaches the heat of 1,000 suns and melts your skin off. As a disabled person, all the damn stairs. I'd love to visit France, but the stairs. The price of gas, or for my buddies across the pond, petrol. I always see American prices and think, how much? And remember that you charge by the gallon and we charge by the litre. Although I think we're probably paying double what you are after that. I mean, we don't have Piers Morgan here. Please, don't let him come back. A lot of places in Europe don't have air conditioning, even though they could really use it. Paying ridiculous amounts of money for a driver's license in Germany. Yeah, I mean here we give them out in freaking cereal boxes. Canadian here. I love Europe, but the population density and crowds there is enough to drive me crazy. Don't get me wrong, there are places that are less populous, but there's nothing like going out into the Canadian country and not seeing another soul. When I was young, I met an exchange student from Austria who commented that one of the things she loved about Canada is that you can drive for hours and still not be in another city. One of the things I'd loved about visiting Europe was that there always seemed to be another interesting town just down the road. Kind of a grass is greener sort of thing, I guess. How much people over there smoked. The lack of accessibility for people with physical disabilities. I lived in the UK, specifically London, for a few months and I'd always think, how is a person with a wheelchair supposed to get through this city? The drying machines that you guys have or don't have for your laundry. I lived in the UK for a couple of years with 2 kids and no dryer at all. It rains there most days, so the outdoor clothes line was next to useless as well. A minor inconvenience in the greater scheme of things, but still pretty inconvenient after what I was used to. I recently visited the UK again and went to use the laundry facilities at our Airbnb. Again, no dryer. And no clothes line either. Had to drape our damp clothes over every radiator, chair, and windowsill in the place for 2 days before anything was wearable. No screens in windows. You don't realize how much you miss them until there's a pigeon in your flat. Pickpockets. I only carry used tissues in my pockets when in Europe. I found them missing more than once and I laugh at the mother frickers because they're holding my snot, whilst my money is snugly tucked away in my prison pocket, which makes it awkward at the sandwich cart, but whatever. Paying to use a toilet, loo. The lack of good Mexican food. It's so much better in the US. Whether it's authentic or American Mexican, it's so bomb. Europe misses out on this and it's sad. Old people walking slowly on the sidewalk. Our old people here in the US are conveniently trapped at home, often with few means of mobility. It's great, apart from Florida. France is an amazing place that's in a shocking state of disrepair. The stoplight under the Louvre is loomed with brown duct tape. Every building needs to be power washed and the highways have weeds growing on them. The entire place could use a new curb and gutter. It's amazing that they're amongst the most heavily taxed nations on the planet, yet things are in disrepair and you get charged an arm and a leg to use the motorways. I think there's a certain age your buildings can get to where power washing would probably be pretty detrimental, but your point is taken. Myself, I kinda like how dirty certain older cities can seem. It feels like character to me. As to where the tax money goes, I don't know. Sound off, French people. From my few trips to Europe, only France and Greece, I'm happy that we don't have the high smoker to non-smoker ratio, the sheer density of population they have in some places, the water scarcity, So many tourists. I know tourism is good for the national economy, but I'd go crazy if I couldn't access my favorite spots because there are always tourists in the way. And finally, that warm weather. It's too much. The lack of public lands and wilderness areas, and the general lack of wildlife. In the States, the public holds ownership of 640 million acres of incredible landscapes, and all wildlife is publicly owned, managed in trust by different agencies. I can plant my feet anywhere on that ground and feel completely free. It's as much mine as anyone else's. I've spent a lot of time in Europe, including 2 18-month stints in Budapest and Rotterdam. I love a lot of the culture, the architecture, and history. I fully plan to return to visit. I'm just unable to live somewhere long-term where I can't take to the wilderness and roam free whenever I want. It might be the most beautiful thing about the United States. This isn't an attack on Europeans or some kind of blame game. This is an incredibly important subject. It deserves a nuanced conversation, not social media's forte. I encourage you to do your own exploring and research, see what's worked and what hasn't. The truth is, the US got lucky early on. We had a president and a large group of outdoors people who recognized that we were about to effectively eliminate wild places during westward expansion, and they did something about it. They assigned value to these places before it was too late and managed to enshrine it as a chief American value. European peoples, my ancestors among them, had a lot more time to settle and resettle most of the continent before Western civilization had the luxury to start thinking ahead. There's also great European organizations working to increase, restore, and improve what remains in the wilderness realm. It's a totally different experience from the US right now. I've only been to Europe once, specifically Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. There's a lot that they do better, but the one thing I didn't like was that sparkling water is somewhat standard there, and also that they don't ice their drinks. I can deal with no free refills and the fact that water isn't free, and I was prepared for that. But I hate sparkling water. I didn't know I had to ask for no gas at first, and that was an unpleasant surprise. Wash-down toilets rather than siphonic toilets. Basically, American toilets, or the siphonic ones, flush using the siphon effect of water to forcibly remove the bowl contents. European toilets, wash-down, flush by running a bunch of water through the bowl and praying that the contents go away. My wife and I were starving and went to a Burger King in Italy. Everything was just like any other Burger King except for when we sat down and took out all our food, we couldn't find the ketchup. So I looked all over for the ketchup near the soda machine, but no go. Finally, I had to break down and bother the serving person for some. Turns out you have to pay for ketchup packs. The server saw the shock on my face and actually apologized, needlessly as it wasn't her fault. Other than that, I loved everything about Italy. Okay, to answer all the replies I'm getting, I hate to do this, but due to the unending parade of morons who just can't fathom that an American would dare to eat fast food in Italy, I spent 2 weeks in Italy. My wife and I ate out every single night and we sampled all of the great food that Italy has to offer. We literally ate our way through Milan, Monza, and Lake Como. Except for one fricking night. You see, we checked out of our hotel in Milan and drove straight to Monza to attend the Italian Grand Prix. Due to the parking situation at Monza, we had to park at a soccer stadium a few miles from the track, and from there take a shuttle that drops you off still 1 mile from the stands, leaving you to walk the rest of the way. We had an Airbnb waiting for us in Lake Como and our hosts were waiting for us, and it was still over an hour drive from the track. So, after walking a mile out, riding the shuttle again, and having not eaten all day and not wanting to keep our hosts waiting, we opted for Burger King, which was directly across the street from the stadium parking lot. It's sad that I'd even need to explain this, and sadder still that 20 fricking idiots simply can't fathom the possibility that someone in Italy might want fast food once in a while, or have other reasons for choosing a quick meal. I'm sorry for all you petty trolls and your small, miserable existences. Okay, although I'm laughing a little bit at this commenter's fury, I do understand their sentiment. I assume that Burger King exists in Italy because sometimes on a blue moon, those culinary gods and goddesses do in fact eat it. Otherwise, it couldn't survive, not even on the massive tourist population there. Italians eat Burger King, so let's go easy on this guy. How hard it is to get meals outside of mealtime. In America, regardless of what hour of the day it is, you can be reasonably sure of finding some kind of restaurant open. Even at 2 a.m. you can find a Denny's or something. Most restaurants, outside of really fancy places, don't close down between mealtimes, so you can go in at any time during operating hours to get food. Compare that to places where all the restaurants are only open during mealtime hours, and you're out of frickin' luck if you get hungry at 10 in the morning. The last time I left the USA was in the 90s, and things might be different now, but that's what frustrated me about my trip. And the number of people writing to me, just buy groceries and make your own food, when I'm talking about an experience on a vacation is astounding. Of course I'd just make my own food if stuff was closed and I lived there, that's what I do at home. You're a bit limited when you're on vacation though. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Well, I am European, well I was until a few weeks ago, thanks Brexit, but I hate how in some countries such as Spain, Turkey and Greece, the sewage system can't handle toilet paper, so you're expected to put it in a bin besides the toilet. I remember being at a water park in Corfu, and the bin was overflowing with used toilet paper. Nasty stuff. My experience in London included walking back to my hotel at 9 PM on a Tuesday and seeing lots of people at the bar across the street drinking, and then going out at 10 AM on the Wednesday morning and seeing a lot of people at the bar still drinking. If having a drink with friends makes you happy, by all means go and do that. Personally, how much drinking I saw in London made little Miss Priss me a bit uncomfortable. Okay, breathe, people. If you're that annoyed about a stranger commenting on it, go have a drink and blow off some steam. There's a sense of claustrophobia I get in Europe. Everything seems tighter. Doorways, streets, alleys, hallways. The hotel I stayed at in Rome had a bed that wouldn't have been acceptable for the most budget motel in the US. There's a sense of being taken advantage of at restaurants with nickel and diming. Bread? That's a charge. Butter with your bread? Another charge. The US has plenty of issues, but I like the wide open spaces. Since I seem to be hurting people's feelings, I do really like your border guards. They're very welcoming and friendly. I apologize for what a rude welcome Europeans get when they arrive in the US. Also, I concede that some issues are related to old cities and tourist traps, and things might be better in the countryside. So here's a list of things I liked and didn't like about your specific country or city to give a more nuanced and positive review. Rome, I liked the Pane el Salame restaurant. I spent 2 hours and 20 euros on a bottle of wine and a giant charcuterie board. Favorite restaurant in Europe. I disliked that bed at the hotel that I mentioned. In Venice, I liked the unlimited Prosecco the hotel provided on their rooftop balcony overlooking the city. And I disliked the food. Worst pizza I've ever had. In Ireland, I liked the wittiness of the Irish and watching the girls there shoot my buddy down in funny ways. I disliked the drunks screaming at the top of their lungs for half an hour at 5 AM outside the hotel window in Dublin. In Barcelona, I liked the affordable, beautiful Jamon, Estrella, beaches, and the metro. I disliked… you know what, I can't think of anything for Barcelona. In Switzerland, I liked the trains being plentiful and on schedule, the mountains, the affordable skiing. I disliked getting charged $2 for tap water in Zurich at a restaurant. In France, I liked the amount of care and seriousness the French put into what they make, from macarons to croissants. I loved the history, like seeing the old walls of Paris in an underground parking garage. Like that kind of history is just normal in everyday life. Raclette after a day of skiing is amazing. I disliked the Senegalese beggars and the feeling that most French were all annoyed that I existed. In Lisbon, there was nothing noteworthy either way. Graz in Austria, I liked Gosser beer. You just can't find it in the US. And in Prague, cheap beer, beautiful city at night. I didn't like the Uber guy trying to scam me by driving me 45 minutes through the countryside for a 15-minute ride to the airport. Didn't like that only 2 kinds of beer were available, light or dark. And in Munich, good food, I guess? I disliked the conditions of the hotel, and Germans have weird toilets. The turds just drop onto a little shelf. Paying for public restrooms. Honestly, I wonder how the elderly manage being out and about. My grandparents and stepmother pee about every 30 minutes, sometimes more, and it would cost a small fortune while traveling, as most restrooms I saw were at least €2, sometimes €5 to use. This was in December of 2016. I was in primarily Germany and Belgium, and my blah blah car host told me that the UK was similar. Germany's train stations consistently smelled of stale pee, and I suspect this was a consequence of having to pay to use the restroom. A clean restroom is nice, but if the result of requiring payment is people just peeing in open spaces, I also don't think the trade-off is worth it. No American lemonade. Apparently some restaurants will just serve you something similar to Sprite if you request lemonade in some countries in Europe. This is because in Europe, lemonade is a completely different beverage. I only learned this the other week on the internet, but our lemonade is generally a clear, sparkling, carbonated liquid. From what I can gather, the lemonade you guys have over there is quite difficult to get a hold of over here. Lots of shops here in the UK sell Sicilian lemon, which is a cloudy yellow flat liquid that is tarter than lemonade. It sounds similar to the descriptions I've read of American lemonade. It kind of boggled my mind that I've grown up consuming American media for the past 20 years and yet never realized that lemonade meant a very different thing to you guys until literally last week. I'm curious, is lemonade used as a mixer in alcoholic drinks over there in the States? It's probably the second or third most popular over here after Coca-Cola and possibly tonic water, but I can't imagine vodka with Sicilian lemon going down quite so easily. Some of these comments really show just how misinformed Americans can be. Okay, so while the narrator, as a rule, greatly prefers life over here in his undisclosed European country, he doesn't think that the points our friends from the US are making are completely invalid. Being a tourist in some parts of the EU is very different to living here, and back when I was a lowly backpacker, I kind of had a lot of the same complaints. We can't blame them for experiencing the brunt of all the tourist stuff that we specifically target them with. Drinks not having ice in them. Cold drinks are where it's at. You can't just get a glass of water at a restaurant there. You have to pay for a bottle. That was the most annoying thing about Europe to me. Which country did you go to? You can certainly get a glass of water for free in the UK as it's required by law. Nothing really. As a middle-class worker, my life would actually be a lot better in Europe. Free healthcare. That's whack, yo. Yes, this is a joke. As a Brit now living in the US for the last 6.5 years, there are many things I don't miss about home, including an obvious one, but yes, the population density, just feeling overcrowded all the time, too many people smoking in public and carelessly around young children, also the crazy price of petrol. Rain year-round. It rains a bit here too, but nowhere near as much. I don't miss it getting dark at 3:30 p.m. in the winter either. The litter everywhere and just the general lack of care about surroundings. Gum and spit on pavements is especially disgusting. I also don't miss the lack of variety with ethnic restaurants. I know I'm somewhat spoiled for choice in my area, but back home it was Indian, Chinese, or Nando's if you didn't want a kebab or fish and chips. There's probably more, but that'll do for now. All of the weirdo beggars who just use little tricks to get you to give them money. All dressed up and painted silver, fake handicaps, gypsies tying stuff to my arm and following me around with it, street artists. If I had to deal with these obscenities every single day, I'd lose my freaking cool and go Beyblade on their butts. European street layouts. It adds character to a city, but it's a total witch to navigate, especially when driving. Your seemingly lax justice system for truly horrific crimes. If someone is kidnapped and tortured, the victim of the unspeakable act and then murdered by someone, it should either be the government putting that person down or it's going to be me. There's nothing that can convince me otherwise. I get your personal feelings, but objectively, you're completely wrong. Prison shouldn't be about punishment, but about reintroduction into society. In the US, reoffending rates are extremely high at around 70%. For contrast, it's like 20% in Norway. I get your personal feelings don't agree with this, but the European system just works so much better. I'm glad we don't have British people. Enough said. A new language every state. The EU. Who needs Germans making decisions for Greece? The fact that you can be criminally charged for hate speech in some countries, Article 13, the out-of-control immigration in some of the others, pickpockets, and how expensive some things are. Also, as a hobby shooter, I dislike the weapon laws over there. God damn it, those pesky lawmakers taking away my hate speech, it's so oppressive. Never been, but I watch an unhealthy amount of traveling shows and sometimes I'm shocked at how small the kitchens are. Also, the driving seems very scary in some places. Europeans who absolutely crap all over Americans when there's questions like, what about the US is weird to Europeans, but can't take it when Americans throw in their 2 cents. I'm an American who's been to 14 countries in Europe, many of them more than once, because I genuinely love to travel over there, and to be honest, I don't have much to complain about. I haven't really encountered much rudeness because I expect a more cold approach from Europeans as a general personality trait, so it doesn't bother me. Someone on the metro in Rome tried to get their hands in my downstairs area once. That kinda sucked, but I still returned a year later because really that can happen anywhere to a woman. I think the most off-putting thing to happen to me was in Paris last year when I had to defend a friend who was being bothered by someone trying to sell her something on Champ de Mars near the Eiffel Tower. I speak French and told him to leave her alone. He proceeded to scream in my face and attempted to shine a laser pointer in my eyes for the next 30 minutes. That really sucked. Viewing from the Trocadero area seems a bit more pleasant. All in all, I've had wonderful times in Europe, but it seems as though many Europeans grow more hostile towards Americans as each day passes, so I probably won't return for a while and will instead look into visiting more of South America in the future. If Americans are so dumb and suck so much, I, as a traveler, will simply go elsewhere. Okay, so I went to France for a school trip, and I could accept the extreme amounts of bread, the lack of hospitality, the lack of free refills, but I couldn't understand the smaller cars. Like, they look the same everywhere, and even the American cars there are smaller. After a while, I thought I just didn't sleep enough and they were normal size. I got so used to those cars and figured I was insane. Once I got back to the US, I almost screamed when I saw a real truck and realized I wasn't crazy. When did you walk away from mortal peril completely unharmed? Once, as a kid, I was in the backyard swimming while my family was nearby eating dinner at a round table. Most of them had their backs to me, but I was like 11 and an experienced swimmer. I got into a toddler's float with leg holes. It ended up flipping over and I was stuck in. My legs wouldn't come out of the leg holes. I kicked and thrashed as much as I could, but I was so stuck. And you can't hear someone screaming underwater. So many thoughts ran through my head, mostly how sad I was that my parents were about to find me dead in a matter of minutes, and how they'd never forgive themselves for allowing me to silently drown as they talked with their friends. I tried one more time to kick out with all of my might. One leg slipped out and I was able to get the other out. I was fine. Totally freaking spooked, but physically okay. I was driving home from college on one of those highways with only one line in either direction and no shoulder. A guy in the oncoming lane didn't see me as I was in a small car. He thought he could pass 4 18-wheelers in one go and pulled into my lane doing at least 90. There was nowhere for me to go. He flew off into the ditch to avoid hitting me head-on and likely did severe damage to his car, but I lived. I was drunk and running in the woods when bam, barbed wire straight to the throat. The last thing I remember was I couldn't breathe and was passing out, and there was blood squirting from my neck. I woke up an hour later and walked home looking like a murder victim. My boyfriend finally woke me up shortly after we'd fallen asleep in a small upstairs room that had a smoldering fire. After we collapsed on the floor and couldn't find the door that wasn't even 5 feet away, we kept hitting walls and corners and started to not comprehend anything. After feeling like I was baking in an oven, I laid my head down on the floor, thinking I'd never see my son again and how sad it was to die. It felt like an eternity and very lonely. My boyfriend somehow found his phone on the floor and called 911. The fire department showed up in what felt like 2 seconds, but couldn't break down the front door. They shined the flashlight up to the window so he could kick out the AC unit, which he did. They finally came upstairs and we crawled to them and they took us straight to the burn unit, since they didn't know what shape we were in. I'm pretty sure the entire hospital staff toured through our rooms since they've never seen anyone make it out and look the way we did, both just painted black by the fumes, but completely, miraculously unharmed, as if a Looney Tunes bomb went off in our faces. The narrator really hopes that somehow you beat the odds and didn't get any lasting respiratory or brain damage from that level of fumigation, but given that you've written a fairly coherent post all these years later, it would seem like you might have actually gotten off scot-free. Congratulations! I ate one of those Brux oval-shaped hard candies, I think they were called sparklets, at home alone when I was 6. It got stuck in my throat. I stood there in shock for a few seconds as I started to realize I couldn't breathe. I ran crazily around the room and ended up colliding hard into the back of the couch, which caused the candy to go flying out. Best accidental Heimlich ever. I had a paintball fight on Christmas morning with 2 cousins and their neighbor kid at around 13 years old with our brand new markers we got as gifts. The neighbor got mad, ran home and came back with a shotty and pointed it at my face. All I remember is looking at the ground and waiting to die. This kid was 11 or 12. He did have his own paintball marker and had already shot me a couple of times before I got him. He was my cousin's neighbor. I think it was the first time I'd ever met him. It was 20-ish years ago, as I'm 33 now, so I can't even remember if I told my parents. I don't know if anything happened to him or not. I'll ask my cousin. Okay, update. We never told my parents. Maybe we were scared of retaliation? I know I never touched that paintball marker again, though. I'm a skier. On a few occasions, I've caught an edge at a pretty high speed, like 50 miles per hour or more, and that moment where you feel both skis leave the ground when they're not supposed to is horrifying. Somehow I've never had anything more than some moderate whiplash and a sprained wrist. Knock on wood. Even if it's not close to dying, you just never know 100% if you land safely or end up limping around with 2 messed knees for the rest of your life. That's probably what makes skiing so exciting. Stay safe, fellow skiers. I was a single-digit age, and for some reason I removed my life jacket while on our family's boat with my parents. I was attempting to sit on the little board that sticks off the back for climbing into when I toppled off into the water. I was still in swimming classes at the time and couldn't do much else but doggy paddle. I was bobbing up and down in the water and I couldn't get enough air in to scream between coming up for air. I was little and getting panicked and tired really quickly and began to sink, one surfacing at a time, until I couldn't surface anymore and I realized I was done. I thought about my parents on the boat who didn't know that I was gone and wondered when they'd realize I was missing and if they'd find me. A big grey fish swam by, and then I saw my mum dive in just as everything went dark. I woke up on the boat in a towel. My tire popped going over a 2-lane road with steep drops on each side. My car jerked to the side hard and my car went sideways. Half of it hung over the side and luckily it's low, so it bottomed out. I climbed into the back seat and jumped out the back door. Some dude in a truck pulled me out and I drove on a flat to the other side and swapped my tire out. I swear it's always just some guy in a truck ready to help. They're either the best people or the worst. The hood on my car came open at about 60 on the highway and completely blocked my sight in heavy traffic. I panicked and jerked the wheel a little bit, which caused me to fishtail. I crap you not, my driver's education teacher's words from 5 years prior rang in my head to lean down and look through the space at the bottom of the hood. I pulled over and used some wire I found in the trunk to keep the hood closed. Anytime you close your hood, make sure it latches securely by pulling on the hood like you're trying to lift the front of the car off the ground. My friend and I just spent a few days at the beach shack. My friend got her P-plates and she was super excited, so she wanted to drive us home. This was one of her first times driving alone. Being 17, we didn't really see an issue. I rang my dad beforehand and told him I was getting a lift. He said, "I don't think you should do that. I can come pick you up. I can drive some of the girls home too. I think you guys should just wait until she's had more experience." Of course, being 17 and thinking that I knew everything, I said it was fine and I was hopping into her car. We were on our way home, playing music and chatting, and there were 5 17-year-olds in this car. I was sitting behind the driver's seat. My friend pulls out onto a 2-1 expressway from a country road, like an intersection. We notice she's turned the wrong way and tell her to make a U-turn. She pulls to the side and decides to go for it through 2 lanes. She's pulled over and tried to make a U-turn so we could go in the right direction. She didn't check her mirrors properly, and a large truck was barreling down behind us. My friend got scared, put her foot on the brake in the middle of both lanes, and we were all screaming at her to keep driving. But she was frozen. I remember it was like slow motion. I looked at every single one of my friends. We all kind of shared a moment of fear, like, this is it, I guess. The exchanged looks haunt me, to be honest. We could hear the truck horn blaring at us. I looked out my window to the truck driving towards us. I locked eyes with the driver. Luckily, it stopped about 5 meters away from us. She pulled away and was really upset. The car was silent the entire way back. It was honestly the scariest moment. I'm from a really small town, and I think losing 5 people at once would really rock it. Seeing my friends' faces in that moment, It was actually horrific. I did have a moment of, okay, here comes the truck. It was oddly peaceful. After that day, I have a real understanding that I'm immortal and I can go at any minute. Oh, and to trust my dad. I went whitewater rafting on the Gowley River and my raft flipped on Pillow Rock, one of the most famous Class V rapids. Scariest moment of my life, but other than unexpectedly swallowing some water and almost chucking up, I came out completely unharmed. The narrator can't be alone in finding whitewater rafting to be an absolutely harrowing experience. For me, it was basically just like one long panic attack. Also, I'm willing to bet that Pillow Rock is not as comfortable a landing as it sounds like. I was coming home from a party at 2 a.m. in 2016 and made a conscious choice to drive through town rather than take the big highway that skirts the city limits. It would add about 10 minutes to the trip, but hey, it was the first time I'd been back in ages. That decision literally almost killed me. Not even 5 minutes after that, the 3-lane highway, really just a wide road, passed in front of a mall, and there was a signal light there. Well, some drunk idiot decided to turn right into the mall from the far left lane, and I was in the middle lane. I had absolutely no time to stop, so I slammed into the side of his car at 65 miles per hour. I remember yelling, "Crap!" and trying to keep control of the wheels to get the car off the road onto the grass, before I blacked out for a few minutes. The airbag and the seatbelt combined had fractured my sternum, which took the air out of my lungs and made me faint, I guess. But it didn't feel like I woke up, more so like my vision came back into focus and I was aware. But those few moments I was still kind of conscious and in immense pain. The worst I've ever felt in my life. I hurt from the skin on the soles of my feet to my scalp. Every single inch was on fire and I was like, so I'm dead. This is my body telling me I'm dead. So when I came to, heat hit me because my car was messed and the engine was hot as standing in a fire. So I was convinced that my car was about to go up in flames. It didn't. I tried to get out, but the door was wedged shut from the crash and I started to panic. I put my back against the passenger seat and kicked the door over and over until it opened and climbed out. Every single police officer, EMT, and even the tow truck guy took one look at my car and told me, "You shouldn't have walked away from that crash at all. The fact that all you have is a fracture and some lacerations is a miracle." So yeah, that's how I almost died and thought for sure I was dead, but got lucky. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My parachute deployed but failed to open. That was one of those moments. Then training kicked in. I cut away my failed chute, deployed my secondary, but for a brief moment life was about to be over in my mind. I was driving down a highway doing 65 miles per hour, and suddenly my car started to shake. I tapped the brakes in reflex and my entire car flipped 180 degrees. I was now facing oncoming traffic, including a semi-truck. I was so close I couldn't see the driver compartment. I screamed and jerked the wheel, bringing me out in front of a sedan, with two people screaming as they watched me appear out of nowhere. I kept screaming and floored the gas pedal. Made it to the side of the road and cried for a long time. I'd blown a rear tire. Hitting the brakes was a terrible, terrible choice. I was a senior in high school, and the student club I was in organized an unofficial beach trip towards the end of the year. No teachers or official permission, leaving me and a few other seniors in charge of supervising everything. After a couple of hours worth of fun, one of the other students came running up to me and said that 3 of the younger members of the club had been swept up by a riptide and couldn't get back towards shore. Me and 2 other older students, all experienced swimmers, immediately went to go and help them. My friends got 2 of the 3 kids in trouble and started guiding them parallel to the shore to get them out of the current. But the guy I went for was panicking, barely staying above water, and started dragging me down with him almost immediately. I yelled for people to get a lifeguard and tried to keep us both afloat, but after a few minutes, maybe 5, maybe 10, it felt like forever, I was getting exhausted and having trouble keeping both of us above water. I couldn't see anyone coming to the rescue. I started getting big mouthfuls of water, and my leg muscles were cramping up. I remember thinking, holy crap, I might actually die right here, right now, as the current started pulling us further and further away from where everyone was. Thankfully for everyone involved, one of the students on the beach had flagged down a couple of surfers who made their way out to where we were as quickly as they could and hauled first the youngest student and then me onto the front of their boards and took us back to shore. I'll always be thankful and appreciative of those strangers who put themselves in the dangerous position of rescuing two drowning swimmers. As several people have pointed out, it's not uncommon for people to die doing what I did, swimming into the water to rescue a drowning swimmer without training or equipment. There are a few techniques for rescuing drowning swimmers that everyone should learn if they're ever in the unfortunate situation of having to use them. I should have used them, but I was 17 and not thinking straight at the time, and I almost paid the price because of it. I was pregnant and got meningitis. At work, I fell ill, and they sent me home because apparently I looked grey. That night, my head felt like it was going to explode to the point that I started ramming my head against the wall to relieve it. My husband was terrified and wanted to call an ambulance, but I refused, thinking it was just a bad headache. Fast forward to things getting worse and to being taken to the hospital and them saying it's probably a migraine. I have migraines, and this was no migraine. A quick-witted nurse saw how confused I was. I couldn't remember my birthday or our son's birthday, or even how to sign my name. She took my temperature and did a urine test. As she's taking my temp, she goes, Whoa, have you taken your temp? It's 104. Suddenly, all of these alarms go off and I can't move. My body felt like I was locked up in a giant cramp, and I was having a fever-induced seizure, but I was conscious for the first part of it. I just saw a storm of doctors and nurses and equipment rushing into the assessment room. I thought, oh my god, my husband is going to get a call that I'm gone, or a vegetable, and my son won't have his mother, and this kid in me now won't know life. Then there was nothing. Lucky for me, they just covered me in ice to bring down my temperature, and that stopped the seizure. They took me to the ICU and sent me for an MRI, and all I remember is them telling me they may have to put me in a coma, and do I want my life to take priority over the life of the baby. Sitting in that ICU room in total isolation, they didn't know if it was bacterial or viral for a day or two, so no one could visit. I had a lot to think about and really had to come to terms with the fact that I might not make it out of this, and my baby might not either. You have to make your peace and stop fearing death and kind of get to work. I wrote letters to loved ones, thanks to a very brave and kind nurse's help. I'm happy to report it ended up being viral meningitis. I fought hard, and both myself and my now perfectly healthy 3-year-old son are doing great. I still have the letters in my safe and hope I never need them handed out. It was a long road to recovery, but I've never taken my health or life for granted again. I own a 65 classic Mustang which I enjoy driving anywhere it can go. I once took it up a large mountain with a group of friends. The roads weren't steep or especially dangerous, but there was danger present because of how high it was. We made it up the mountain with no issues and stopped at a bar at the top where my friends got plastered. I didn't drink because I was the designated driver. Before I continue, I need to clarify that the brakes on a stock classic Mustang from the 60s need to be primed before use. Basically, you have to hit the brakes twice before they work. On the trip down, the brakes cut out and stopped working. I primed the brakes over and over, but they didn't engage. The parking brake hadn't been working the past month and was going to be replaced that Monday. I soon lost control of the car and we started to barrel down the road. We turned a shallow right and saw a long road that ended with a sharp turn. At that moment, I thought I was going to die and take my friends with me. They had no clue, they were plastered in the back. Luckily, the brakes re-engaged halfway down the road and we managed to turn the corner. It's been 4 months and I haven't touched that car. To this day, my friends have no clue what almost happened. Hitting the brakes twice to engage them? What is this madness? I'm hoping that this is something that we've completely phased out by now. Also, go figure that a vast majority of people's near-death experiences are car-based, with a close following of people in water. A really bad flash fire at work where I jumped into a pit to get away from the heat. I saw the flames roll right over the top of the pit. I thought for sure I was going to die. I got some wicked third-degree burns, but I lived. I was driving on the turnpike in my Mazda 3 in the hard rain. It was 3 lanes and I was in the left lane doing 55, and then I hit standing water and hydroplaned. I did a full 360 spin across all 3 lanes of traffic and ended up in the shoulder, stopped. I didn't hit anyone or anything, no one hit me, and one car was so scared with me that they also pulled over, but they didn't check on me. To this day, I'm still a bit scared in the rain. When I was about 16, I was mowing some lawns over the summer to make a little extra cash. One guy hired me to mow his lawn. He seemed nice enough, like a kindly old hippie who lived alone. I get to his house and he invites me in to give me some yard equipment. Once I step inside, he closes and locks the door behind me. He says, "Just locking the door to keep the bugs out." Wait, what? He leads me through his house and starts saying all of this weird stuff. "I don't know what you've heard about me around the neighborhood, but none of it's true. I'm straight as an arrow." We get to his basement. I keep the mower in the basement. I probably should have hightailed it out of there, but as a polite teenager, I followed him down the stairs into said dark basement. Once I get down to the basement, my eyes adjust to the darkness. I start to get really scared. The entire basement has been plastered in 1970s Playboy undressed centerfolds, but they've all been chopped up, missing heads, missing limbs. That's when I turn around and see the guy emerging from the darkness, wielding a machete. That's when I was sure I was going to die. I just didn't know if he'd hack me up right then and there, or lock me in the basement and torture me for a few days. My fight or flight response was about to kick in, but then he hands me the machete and tells me to use it to cut back the kudzu. Huge relief. I mowed his lawn and cut back his kudzu, and the whole time I could see him watching me out the window. I finished as fast as I could and got the heck out of there. He called me a few times in the next weeks to mow his lawn again, but I never picked up. Eventually, he moved away. To this day, I'm not sure if he was an actual serial killer or just a kooky old man who didn't understand how creepy he really was. When I accidentally got dosed with something nasty at a party because I drank the drink of a female friend, I left for home on my own and fell from my bike 5 times and landed in the bushes next to the road. I threw up everything I had inside me and was so disoriented that I couldn't get up anymore. I slept through the night in the bushes while it was 13 degrees Celsius out and had multiple occasions where I thought I'd die. I called the emergency numbers multiple times, but they wouldn't come, and eventually I got picked up by a taxi chauffeur that brought me home after laying in the wet bush for 8 hours. I couldn't leave my bed for 3 days after that. The only thing I'm happy about in that experience is that the female friend didn't drink it and got home safely. What crazy, fake-sounding excuse to not come into work turned out to be true. I once came too late to my first day of work at my new employer because my train took a wrong turn and ended up in a totally different city. Try explaining that. Worked at a summer camp as a manager. I had to call because one of our employees didn't show up. Former Marine. Good guy. Gave him a call on the home phone. No answer. Called on his cell phone. I heard, "Hey, sorry, I'm in the middle of something." Then there were the sound of shots and glass shattering. I said, "Oh, okay, call you later." And he said, "Yeah, alright." And then I heard an automatic firing. "See you later." Director asked if he was going to come in today or tomorrow, and I said, I didn't ask. I wasn't going to distract him anymore. He was okay. It turns out some people across the street had started blasting each other. Some stray shots went through the window and wall while his family was eating breakfast, so he simply returned fire. Saddest one was when a guy called in and said he couldn't make it in because his wife just lost their twins, like 2 weeks before the due date. I remember him saying it pretty casually and that he'd call in later about tomorrow's shift. I was just stunned. I couldn't believe it. I told him to go spend some time with his wife, and I was taking him off the schedule for 2 weeks. He broke down after that and just started crying uncontrollably. I gave him the number to one of those counseling services that's offered through our company, but man, I still remember how absolutely broken he was. He was never the same when he came back too. Still a great employee, but definitely much more of a solemn person after that. My weirdest one? A girl called me from an unknown number, like different digits than what I'm used to seeing, but it's my work phone, so I figure it's legit. "Hey boss, won't be able to make it into work tomorrow, possibly for the next few days." Well, how come? A volcano erupted nearby and my flight has been grounded. What? Seriously? Yeah, turn on the news. Well, okay then, call me when you get back. Yes, the narrator remembers that particular hold-up to basically all of the world's flights in 2010. IDOWorkHereLady. I'm not sure if I've pronounced that volcano correctly. It's wild how one eruption in such an obscure little country probably caused the biggest number of call-ins to unbelieving employers in history. Once I was late because of traffic. So I texted my boss in a standstill on the highway, "I'm jammed up on the highway, I'll probably be a half hour late." And he texted back, "Yep, I see you. I'm in the green Ford Focus a few cars back from you." My new employee got hit by a car first day of work. Never showed up that day, but he called in the next one. He settled with the driver that hit him and bought a BMW or something with the money. Makes me wonder if there's a chain reaction of people being hit by cars, suing and buying new cars to hit each other and buy them new cars going on out there. I gave a weird excuse that my boss didn't believe. My grandmother had ALS and was in her final few days. I asked for a few days off. She was hanging on longer than anyone thought she would. The day I was set to go back, my grandfather had a heart attack and died instantly. My boss just kept saying, "I thought your grandma was sick." 2 days later, my grandmother did pass. I got this text the other day. "Hey, my brother's cat died. I have to go to the funeral." Apparently, his brother was autistic and wouldn't let them take the cat unless they agreed to a funeral for it. So instead of letting him clutch a diseased pet, they agreed to demands. I almost didn't believe him till he showed me a picture of him in a suit with his family and a shoebox. I didn't give him any problems because the dude is a good brother. About 10 years ago, I had a young adult friend who got an internship where I was working. He came in the morning, started complaining about feeling like he had been kicked in the stones. We had a 2-day staff retreat up in the mountains, and he didn't show up to the carpool situation to head out later that day. About halfway to the retreat, we heard that he was feeling sick. We all kinda rolled our eyes and annoyedly joked around about how he was just a young guy who didn't want to go on the retreat and was bailing. There was no phone reception at the retreat. We got home and received several messages from his parents. He had been diagnosed with cancer down there over the weekend and had been taken in for emergency surgery to remove one of his stones and several lymph nodes, and he'd be starting chemo shortly after recovering from surgery. He made it through the treatment, and I'm glad to say he's doing fine to this day. This was one of my co-workers at the time. He called in around 9:30, work started at 8:30, and said that they'd been in a motorcycle accident and had fractured their foot and were heading home from the hospital. They were planning to come in the afternoon. Fair enough. Then called in about 2.5 hours later saying they'd been T-boned on the way out of their neighborhood and wouldn't be in for the rest of the day. It was all true. Worst day ever. I just don't feel good, you know? I can't explain it, I just feel weird. The poor fricker was in the middle of complete organ failure. I had him stay home and told him to get to a doctor. He never made it and died in his sleep at home. I'm a recruiter, and not too long ago, I called a candidate that had applied for a position I'd listed. He never called me back. I called the next day and his wife answered. She said when I called yesterday that she went to tell him his phone was ringing and found him passed away. My dad got hit by a bus. I have to go identify his body for the police. Yeah, I ended up giving him a ride to the hospital because he didn't have a vehicle, and I couldn't reconcile making him ride a city bus when his dad was just killed by another city bus. She was stuck in traffic and about 15 minutes late because an elephant was being moved across the parking lot. I got the big C disease. My conversation with the boss went something like this. "I'm going to the ER after work, I think I have a hernia." And 12 hours later, "Turns out I have cancer, I'll be back to work when I don't have it." She wasn't really that cool about it. Tried to fire me while I was going through chemo. A year later, different job, cancer comes back in the lymph nodes. I tell my new boss, "That cancer I had, it came back, I have to travel to Indiana for surgery." And she calls me back, "I got you 6 months of short-term disability." Not only that, she gave me $1,000 of her own money to help with medical expenses. Good bosses can make or break how you feel about a job. My son was late to work once because of a whale. It got itself lost and stuck in the harbor. Too many people blocking traffic on the bridge, trying to get a look at it. He couldn't get through. One morning I went to open the door to my apartment and the knob came off in my hand. The shaft came off with it, so the outside knob fell off as well. After 30 minutes of jabbing at it with a screwdriver, I called a locksmith, and then my boss to explain to him that I'd be late because I was locked into my apartment. I had to call in late because the door fell off my apartment. I went to leave for work, closed it behind me, and heard a loud crash. The hinges had come unscrewed and fallen off. Since I couldn't leave my apartment without a door and I didn't have an electric bill, I had to wait for maintenance to come put it back on. My boss thought I was lying until I took a picture of the door lying on the floor and sent it to him. Well, this one time I had to call in because my house was burning down. I'm a 911 operator, and this is the kind of call I expect to get at some time. Sir, you need to get out of the house. Well, it's a corded phone though, and I kind of feel like I need to call my boss first. I've had iterations of that call before. I guess one of the advantages of us having these little pocket computers that we're glued to 24/7 is that now slaves of their workplaces can not only reliably call from outside the inferno, but also video in for the ultimate in irrefutable evidence. There's a dead body in my house. It turned out her roommate's brother was misdiagnosed with asthma when he had pneumonia. She tried to come in after to work. I sent her to go get a beer and her nails done. I taught an exercise class for the Y. I had to tell the cops to call my boss as they took me in for felony kidnapping my own kid. Custody dispute, completely mishandled by the cops by the way. No charges after I spent the night in jail. My boss actually took the time to call my friend from the gym who was a lawyer, so that was pretty cool. She also let me dress as an escaped prisoner that Halloween as a joke. I'm stuck on an island? She was too. There was a storm and the boat was cancelled. What are you gonna do? A guy called us and said, "There's a bomb in my yard and the cops won't let me leave." Everyone was like, "Oh yeah, sure thing, Paul." I'll be gosh darned if they didn't have to call the bomb squad to his house. It was all over the news. Sorry, Paul. I was on a work trip to the States and flying back to the UK for a really important meeting on Monday. Or that was the plan. My flight got turned around over northern Canada and sent back to our original airport when the Icelandic volcano went off. I called my boss and he was a jerk about it, asking why I wasn't able to get another flight. All air traffic over Western Europe was grounded. What am I going to do, fly to Athens via Sydney and hitchhike to London? He said I'd have to pay for my hotel and living expenses out of pocket, and he'd put the time I was stranded against my annual leave. My director overheard him and took over. She'd do the meeting for me since she was going to be in the area, and she told me to find myself a hotel and put a bottle of whiskey on the expenses. She even told me that if I ended up being there more than a couple of days, I could expense myself a coat and fresh gloves, since my original trip was to New Orleans and I was stranded in Chicago, and the spring weather is pretty different. I ended up not being able to get a flight back for nearly a week, and her being generous about it meant I could actually function and work remotely, rather than being too stressed out to cope. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My dad once left work because my mum had started bleeding heavily with no lady products to take care of it, and she had 2 small children at home. He told his boss, "My wife's basement is flooding." And his boss, also his uncle, said, "Wait, you live on a concrete slab? Oh yeah, bye." One morning in France when I checked in, I saw an employee smoking his cigarette in front of his car. He was early, so he had time to do so. Well, a police car starts to pass in front of him, really slow while looking at him like he was a gosh darn psychopath. The dude thought it was a good idea to wave them hello. The cops stopped their car and jumped out to check him. They checked the exterior of his car, his papers and such for about 30 minutes, and told him they had to wait for the national police to check the interior of the car. So they call in. The national police answer them that they'll be here in about an hour. So here they are, the 3 musketeers, the dude and the 2 cops, standing in the middle of a parking lot, not talking, not doing anything for an hour except staring at each other. The national police come in, check the car, nothing to see, and nothing to be alarmed, of course. So they ask the city cops what the heck this was about, to which they answer, "He waved us hello." It was easy to tell that the national police weren't too glad to come down for such BS. The employee was finally released after 2.5 hours of nonsense. The employee didn't have to explain crap as the manager saw everything. He was noted late with that cause. Waving hello to police officers. Now everyone at our place who sees those cops waves them hello. Not sure if this counts, but an old employee who used to run his own company used to be a real hardliner. "You'd better be dying if you call in," kind of thing. He had an employee call in and tell him, "Boss, I met a woman and I'm going to be spending the day in bed." He let him stay home. Employee here. My boss called me asking if I could come in early. I told her that I went partially blind because apparently my eyes are sensitive to bleach, but that I was still planning on coming in later. She gave me the day off because, as she put it, as a lifeguard, you do need to be able to see the kids in order to save them. A girl I work with once called in late because a deer stole her wig. Literally no one believed her until she showed up about half an hour late with a bandana on her head and a grainy picture of a deer standing with her afro in its mouth. She rides her bike to work through a patch of wooded area and apparently stopped because something got stuck in her wheel, and was laying on the ground for so long, not moving, trying to fix the wheel, that a deer came over, chomped her wig and ran off with it. I was in awe. Once I had to ring into work because I'd fallen cleaning my ear with one of those cotton earbuds. Bad for you, I know, but they just feel so good. Anyway, I had to go straight to the emergency doctors. Luckily, no lasting damage, but I had awful hearing and dizziness for weeks. I'd just hired a new prep cook. About a week in, I was driving into work and I passed a truck pulled over on the highway, and a guy running back to it carrying something in his hands. He looked vaguely familiar. Anyways, I got to work and went through the motions. 20 minutes past the time he was supposed to arrive, I called him up to see what was going on. He said, "Sorry, I had to, stop and take care of something important." The way he hesitated made me suspicious. I asked if he drove a red Ford. "Yeah." I respond with, "Did I see you picking up roadkill this morning?" Turns out he saw a dead raccoon, picked it up and drove it back home. Fast forward to a week later and he's got a raccoon skin mounted on his truck dash. I was the employee that was late. A truck was transporting bees, got in an accident on the freeway, overturned and released most or all of the bees from it. They were trying to contain some of them, but I believe they lost most of them. This was about a half hour north of Seattle. A lot of people were late that day. Not the bees! I mean, once a container explodes, can you really do anything about it? In any case, there must have been at least one employee fired that day because their boss just flat out wouldn't believe them. I technically was already at work and left early for this. I went to my supervisor's office. Where I work, each department is broken up into two: wrapping and makeup. I work at a snack production plant. Makeup makes said snack and wrapping wraps it and sends it on its way onto the trucks. So, in the office is my boss and the makeup boss, a super chill guy. It went like this. "I need to leave," I said. "Why?" said wrapping. "I have a situation that I need to take care of immediately. Now." "Did you crap yourself?" said makeup, way too excited about it, I might add. No, my hemorrhoids have ruptured. I have about 5 minutes before the blood soaks into my pants. I need to go home." Get the frick home," say both bosses. I didn't try to keep it secret as I don't care, but it was kind of funny for a few days being the guy whose butthole exploded. My employee said, "Hi boss, I'm afraid I'm going to be hard-pressed to get into work today." "Oh, why's that?" "My house is literally frozen shut. The front door won't open, the windows are all frozen shut, the back door is stuck, and the garage won't open." "Can you not pour some warm water on them?" "I would, but the power is out and the central heating is packed in. I don't have a gas hob either." "I see. Well, enjoy your day freezing in your house, reading books, and shivering to keep warm." "Touché." I had an employee who had an ingrown hair. Turns out he was rushed to the hospital and had a very badly infected abscess, and the infection had spread to his blood. I now feel sorry for laughing when he told me his excuse for not coming in. I really thought he was joking with me. He broke his arm trying to start his truck. His normal car wouldn't start, so he decided to drive his model AA Ford to work instead of jerking around with the car. Well, the electric starter on the truck wasn't working, so he decided to hand crank it. I guess it being early and him being rushed and frustrated made him less careful with the whole procedure. The crank snapped back and broke his arm. He had a soda bottle lodged in his butthole. That's when you just give them the vague, "I'm in the ER" excuse. I mean, that's believable but commonly faked. No one says they have a booty bottle unless they really do. My sister had to call out of work once due to our neighborhood being locked down by the SWAT team. She tried to leave for work and a guy in full SWAT gear popped out from behind our garage bins and told her to get back inside. They were all over our neighborhood, hiding out. Our neighbor had barricaded himself in his house and, at the time, It was believed he had his 2 small children and was going to off them and then himself. Later, we learned his wife had the kids, so they weren't in any danger, but the man did end up self-deleting. Very sad for our small community. He's feeling sad. It was going to be a busy day at the hotel, so we went around to his house to sort it out. It sounded like a BS excuse, to be honest. Found him lying face down in his room, unwilling to move. He had a little switchblade out as well on the table, which we immediately took away. He quit shortly after, and even though I tried my best not to show it, that incident really shook me. First time I'd ever seen the effects of depression, especially to someone who we'd been hanging out with, and never ever expected that from. I hope he's better now. At my old retail job, we had a 16-year-old girl hired on as my department's lead. She made it on her first day, but had to leave because she kept throwing up. Didn't show up for a month, but was kept in the position. I later found out that she discovered she was pregnant, on her way out of state to get an operation. It's practically impossible to get anything at a clinic where I live. She was in a car accident, which caused her to lose her baby, but she was otherwise unharmed. Wound up having to go to therapy to understand all of it. She's much better now and seems to have matured a fair bit afterwards. Still, one hell of a way to be thrown into life. I can't come in. There's a bear on my porch eating my pet chicken. I'll give a story of my awesome girl boss instead. Got to work at 8:45 feeling fine. By 9:15, I felt like someone had shivved me in the side, and I felt like I was either going to chuck up or pass out from the pain. I walked into her office at 9:30 and just looking at me, she knew something was up, and before I say a single word, she says, "Oh my God, are you okay?" I said, "I think I have a kidney stone. Get your coat, I'm taking you to the hospital." We went downstairs, she flagged a cab, came to the hospital with me, paid for said cab, and got me checked in before heading back to the office. Stabbed in the leg with a steak knife by his friend whilst drinking. My true but unbelievable excuse for being late to a meeting was, I'm stuck on the highway behind a gazebo. I still can't believe a slow-moving gazebo was blocking me on the road. Worse, the whole time I couldn't think of anything but the angry gazebo story over and over. Got pulled over on my way to work one morning. An officer comes up and informs me that there's a warrant for my arrest that was issued a few days after the last time I was pulled over and they found my green herb pipe. They'd taken it and let me go. 3 months later, I'm finding out they still wanted me. Anyway, the cop is cool after I explain that I'm on my way to work. I have my cousin in the car with me as we work together. He lets me go drop my cousin off on the condition that I immediately turn myself in. I proceed to work and walk in, straight to my supervisor, and it goes a little something like this. "Hey, I'm not going to be able to stay today." "What? You're already here. What's up?" "I've got to go to jail." "Do what now?" "I got pulled over. Turns out I have a warrant. I've got to go turn myself in." "Okay, well, just let me know how it goes. See you tomorrow?" "Yeah, we'll see." It went okay. I did get to work the following morning. Construction workers are a dodgy bunch. Gentlemen, have you ever been the victim of a female creeper? Years and years back, I worked in a call center and I was friends with this girl. I didn't think anything of it until she propositioned me to do the deed with her. While I was flattered, I told her I was dating someone else and I wasn't going to cheat. Fast forward to a few days later, I go into work and get pulled into HR. Turns out she's now filed a report against me. She worked in an area away from me, but they decided I'd needed an assigned seat beside my supervisor so that we would have no interaction, period. I was fine with that until her friends started sitting not too far from me, usually right in front of my field of view. And she'd come over and sit and talk to them, antagonizing the situation. My boss saw what was going on and brought it up to HR that she was pushing the situation, but it was her words against mine or my boss's. A few more weeks of me being watched like a hawk go by, and I go into work only to find security and my boss waiting for me. Apparently, she felt that me looking in her general direction was an attack, so she filed another claim, this time saying I've been sending explicit messages and emails to her. This time, my boss fought for me, but I got sent home, walked out in front of the entire call center surrounded by security. I remember writing an email to HR and management that night, stating I'd had absolutely zero contact with her since the night she propositioned me, and offered my computer, a lie detector, anything to prove my innocence as long as they'd question her. Well, apparently they brought that to her, and she ended up confessing that she made the whole thing up, and that she did that to another employee and got them fired because they turned her down. For some reason they let her keep her job. In fact, they gave her a fat severance package a few months later. I got stuck in the same punished seat and being threatened that if I told any coworker what happened, I'd be fired. I left a few weeks after the incident, but she had ruined my reputation. In that line of work, I couldn't find a job for anything for a while. A few years down the line, she spots me on a dating app and tried to hit me up. And yes, at the time I did try to sue. What was more screwed up is that no lawyer in town would even touch the suit. To this day, I still don't get it. My ex attacked me with scissors when I got home one night. She insisted that since I didn't answer her calls that I was cheating on her. I wasn't. The scissors went 3 inches into my gut. In a daze of confusion, I wrestled her to the floor in an attempt to stop her attack. I woke up 4 days later to learn her brother, who, while I was trying to subdue her, thought I was attacking her, and he hit me in the head with a cast iron skillet. 12 stitches and a slightly worse short-term memory later, I said to myself I'm never talking to her again. Don't stay with a hot girl when you know some screws are loose. That's probably a good lesson for both genders, to be honest. My God, how did nobody walk away from this one with criminal charges? You're probably lucky to be alive. I was seeing this girl for about 6 weeks. We went out one night and she said she had to work late the next day but wanted to come over afterwards. So, I gave her my apartment's spare key because why not, and told her to let herself in. I ended up falling asleep waiting for her. I woke up at like 12 a.m. and noticed there was a TV light on in the living room. I figured she was just watching something and maybe grabbing a snack before she came to bed. I got up to say hi, rounded the corner, and she was on my computer sifting through Facebook. I asked her what she was doing, and it was obvious she had no idea I was awake, and she freaked out. Needless to say, I told her to give me my key back and showed her the door. The funny thing is, if she asked, I would have let her look. I had nothing to hide. I would have thought it was weird, but everyone has their trust issues. But doing something like that behind my back was just not cool. To this day, I never leave my computer without hitting Win L to lock it. I was doing the deed with a girl for the first time, and during it, she stopped and said, "I don't think I can do this. I'm pregnant." We went to sleep, and after that night, I continued hanging out with her for a while. She eventually got a boyfriend, and he messaged me on Facebook saying, "If I ever see you, I'm going to kick your butt. I know what you did to her. Don't respond to this message because I don't want her finding out I'm messaging you." I'm still kind of confused by the whole situation. My guess is that she already had that boyfriend and was cheating on him with you, got cold feet during it, said to stop the fun, went back to him, felt guilty, told him that you committed the unspeakable act on her. That's what it sounds like to me anyway. My 21st birthday, a coworker took me out for drinks. His girlfriend came along. I used to work with her. Her boyfriend got me in his company after I got laid off. I chucked up so much in their bathroom toilet and they went to bed. I woke up several times on her living room couch with her hand up the back of my shirt rubbing my neck. She had noticed that I was awake and then go back to bed, then come back a few minutes later. They broke up and he told me how much she wanted to do me. Oh, and they were both old enough to be my parents, by the way. I was at the grocery store with my wife, then my 2-year-old daughter, and my twin, then infant sons. My wife was pushing a double stroller with our daughter, and one of the boys was in it. I was carrying the other, who was calmly cuddled up on my shoulder. We're in the produce section when some random middle-aged woman that I've never seen before in my life spots us, makes a beeline towards me, stretches out her hands and tries to take my kid out of my arms. She didn't look at my wife or me, didn't say a word to either of us. She literally just tried to grab my son off me with no prompting or invitation whatsoever. I stepped away from her and shielded my kid while my wife chased her off. That wasn't the only weird, creepy middle-aged or older woman to come out of the woodwork when the twins were still babies, but she was definitely the most frightening. When I was in middle school, a friend of mine was absolutely fascinated by the fact that I had hair down there. She didn't want to see my Johnson, just the majestic mane. This girl who works at my mum's work, they're both servers, always tells my mum she's going to marry me and thinks that I'm cute. It wasn't a big deal at first, but it got out of control for a little bit there, commenting heart eyes and inappropriate remarks on any post my mum made with me tagged in it. Finally, she followed me on Instagram and liked every one of my 700-something posts. And here comes the best, or worst, part. She starts messaging me through Instagram, and I didn't reply once. but she begins having a conversation with herself with me in my inbox, like asking questions and answering them for herself and replying as if I said something and saying things like, "I heard from your mum that you're going through a rough time," and then she opens up to me about her past, which is a long and inappropriate thing to send someone who's never replied to you. This is among many other creepy things she's done to me. She doesn't bother me anymore though, just the occasional like on a picture. I was at the pub with some friends and one of them left a scarf at a now-packed table. She was feeling socially awkward and asked me to go get it. I thought, no big deal, I'll get it and show her there's nothing to be worried about. I asked a woman in her early 20s, I was 18 by the way, if she could pass me the scarf. This lady got up, walked over to me, wrapped it around my neck and proceeded to cut off my air supply with it, really going for it. Her hands were shaking from the force she was putting into pulling the two ends of the scarf. The pub was packed, but everyone just kind of stood there, not sure exactly what was happening, myself included. After what felt like ages, two guys pulled her back to her table. They were looking at me worried, shaking their heads with faces that said, "We have no idea, dude." Everyone around the table clearly knew her, and they were shocked by her behavior. I can't help but think about how differently this would have played out if the genders were reversed. If a man did that to a woman in a crowded pub, he would be thrown out and the police would be called. I came back to my dorm to find a girl who I didn't know waiting for me. I'd apparently served her food once at the campus food place I worked at. She figured out who I was and where I lived without even my name. I'm not sure how I managed to shoo her out peacefully, but I did. Wow, okay, the narrator felt sure that this kind of creep was for sure the kind of thing that only male creepers had the gall to do. But there you go, I have no idea what I'd do about that. Third week of May 1993. I broke up with my girlfriend, but she still had my choir letter jacket. We were in high school, but going to different high schools. Last day of school, I walked from my high school to her house to get my letter jacket. I got to her house and I see she's not home, so I sat towards the other end of the street, waiting for her. Hours later, she finally comes home, so I start walking towards her house. She goes inside, I wait a bit, knock on the door and say, "Melinda, I really just want my choir letter jacket and I'll leave you alone." 30 minutes go by and finally she comes out with it. I'm ready to walk home, but no, she offers me a ride home, to which I say, "Okay, but I have no interest in talking." I get home and she leaves. Fast forward to the fall of '93. I'm working at JCPenney's in their optical area. Close for the night, come out and notice some guy parked next to my car. I blow it off. I leave and after a few miles I notice this guy is following me. Okay, time to drive to the police station. I stop at a gas station that had a payphone and I call the non-emergency phone number for the police and I told them the situation. I drive to the police station and as I get closer, the officer stops me and the car following me gets barricaded in by two cop cars. I found out this person was a retired Texas sheriff that had been hired by my ex, whose father is also a retired Texas sheriff, to keep tabs on me. He gets brought inside and I talk him into calling my ex and telling her he got arrested for following me and she had to come bail him out. She shows up with her dad and crap hits the fan. I ended up putting a restraining order on the ex-sheriff along with her entire family. 5 years later, she sent me an invitation to her wedding and I mailed it back with no postage, written on the invitation, "F off." When I picked up my 90-day chip in an AA meeting, this old lady seductively kissed my neck and told me congratulations. While not interested, I still sprang a stiff one. A lady who sucked my blood from an open scab without informing me she was about to do so. She told me she considered herself a vampire. We'd just started dating. I showed her a pic of my son. She then asked what I was going to do with him once we had kids. Well, at least she did you the courtesy of filtering herself out rather than making you figure this out way down the line. A girl borrowed my hoodie in 9th grade and apparently flicked the old bean on it and gave it back to me. She was a really disturbing girl, but I didn't find out until that happened. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The girl I'd been dating for just a couple of weeks invited me to her mum's house for dinner. Halfway through dinner, I finally noticed that they'd printed out pictures of me from MySpace, this was back when MySpace was normal, and then they'd put them in frames, randomly interspersed them with other family pictures throughout the house. They were laughing hysterically at my reaction, and I told them very plainly and very seriously that if it was a joke, it was hilarious. But if it wasn't, and they never actually answered whether it was a joke or not, we didn't last much longer after that. You know, the opposite of this is known as mantelpiecing. You take a framed photo of yourself to another person's house and sneakily leave it displayed in a prominent place, or optionally switch a picture that they already have for one of yourself. Ah, weird staring girl. When I was in high school, I noticed a girl just staring at me while I was eating lunch with my friends in the cafeteria. I didn't really think much of it that day. The next day, I see the same girl just staring at me again. This time, I think maybe she likes me or a friend sitting next to me. The girl isn't ugly or anything, just a nice normal girl. This keeps happening like almost every day for 2 weeks or so. She even eats food just staring at me. Sometimes I see her standing in the hall staring while I'm waiting for a class to start. Even when I went to the basement with another group of friends to have lunch, she is there. So after a hallway death stare incident, I get creeped out and tell my friends in a class about this. They don't believe me, or some make jokes and laugh. So one day at lunch, I whisper to my friends that this girl's been staring at me for 2 weeks. It's creeping me out. They look at her and tell me that they've noticed it too, but they didn't say anything. I'm hoping it's just a weird crush she has, so I just end up going up to her and saying, "Hi." She answered by staring for 15 seconds completely silently. I say, "Why do you keep staring at me every day?" She continues staring for 30 seconds or so, and I tell her, "Please stop doing that," and I walk away. The next day, nope, there she is. Thank God she moved to a different school after a few weeks. At least she didn't follow me to my home, I think. Joke's on you, she's under your bed while you're listening to this audio right now. Okay, calm down, I'm joking. Or am I? Yes. Or am I? I was a limo driver for a number of years. One time, this very drunk girl climbed through the divider into the front seat. I was on a fairly busy stretch of highway with nowhere to immediately pull off, and there was a lot going on the road, so I really couldn't do anything but try to reason with her. I was seriously afraid she'd bump me or the wheel or do something that would cause an accident. After she worms her way up, she starts rubbing my thigh and telling me that I should leave my girlfriend for her. All the while, her friends in the back were egging her on and thinking it was funny as heck. I pushed her hand off my upper thigh and Johnson region several times before I finally managed to get to an exit where I could stop. It took me threatening to cancel the trip for her to get in the back of the car. It's not the only time something like this has happened, but it's the only time a girl risked all of our lives to make it happen. Usually, there's one reasonable person in the group to keep the crazies in check. Oh boy, when I was younger, 22 I think, I signed up to work an event at the job I was at. I had to work a table with an activity and help these Girl Scouts craft something. So these two 13-year-old girls came up and they started making crafts. Then they asked me for my phone number and I told them no. They asked my name then and I told them no again. They constantly asked for both of these things and I constantly refused. A female coworker came up and started chatting with me. The girls then asked her for my info and she gave it away. I was angry, and thinking back, I'm still angry. One of them started texting me immediately. I told her to stop and she laughed and walked away. I blocked her number. The next day I got a Facebook friend request from her and blocked that too. Then I started getting messages from her. The same coworker had given out my work email address and my MySpace account. She was very persistent in getting me to talk to her, and I hated it. Finally, I messaged her troop leader and told her about what was going on, and she just said she'd take care of it, and I never heard from her again. I think not just her age, but how persistent she was creeped me out more than anything. I was real drunk and passed out on my friend's couch. His friend was also there. I woke up to find her on top of me and pouring whiskey down my throat. It's not like I needed any more, I was destroyed. Apparently, we did do the deed that night. Can't say for certain whether I was conscious for it. A girl licked my knee at a club. Walking from school in a big gaggle, I overhear a girl about 20 feet down at full volume say, "I could do the deed with that guy anytime I want." I mean, she could've, but it's still kinda creepy. In the middle of lifting, I was interrupted by a woman who'd told me I'd make a great stepdad. I have no idea who she was, but I did nope out quite fast. I've had women grab me down there, also my butt, and rub themselves on me. And no, they're never hot. One of them told me point blank, "I've seen your wife, you've seen my husband. I think we can both do better, don't you? Come on, we'd make such a great pair." A girl I dated made a voodoo doll out of her used sanitary products and my hair shavings from my electric razor that she said she'd use on me if we ever broke up. She buried it inside a lunchbox at the beach and drew a map to find it. She's now a married mother of 2. I was at a music festival in an American flag onesie last year, and a lot of people were wanting to take pictures with me. I was having a good time meeting a bunch of new people, and this group of older ladies, between 40s and 50s, came up to me and wanted a picture. When I got in their group, one kneeled down. When they took the picture, the one who'd knelt grabbed my downstairs. I moved and yelled, "Hey!" She said shut up and grabbed it again and said, "You're a guy. Enjoy this." I ended up leaving pretty quickly at that point. Searched my apartment, phone, camera, computer, and everything else I owned the first time I left her alone in my place because she wanted to know more about me. She ended up creating a version of my personality she interpreted through my things. She showed up at my apartment block back in college. She knocked on the door, and I didn't answer. It was late, I was tired, and I didn't invite her over. She kept knocking louder and louder. The police arrived and asked her to leave. She left and showed back up about 5 minutes later. She knocked some more and finally gave up. The next morning, I found a human turd on my doormat. I mean, maybe she was just desperate for the toilet? She actually lived in the same apartment complex. I think it was an anger turd. Oof. Well, at least you likely didn't have to put up with her after that. That's a pretty clear sign of a lack of continuing interest on their part. Although, now I think about it, there are definitely weird guys who'd keep trying after doing that, so maybe it's not outside the realm of possibility. I was at work when a customer came in. She was overweight and looked pretty sloppy. Hair was a mess, wearing pajamas, a mismatched pair of shoes. She came up to me and asked how she looked because she was about to start driving for Uber and wanted to know if she looked presentable. I just said, sure, and tried walking away, but she wouldn't let me leave. I don't know how we ended up here, but she started talking about how her skin can't handle most soaps and had to use some alternative to it. Can't remember what that was. She shoved her arm in my face, telling me to smell it and to see that it didn't smell bad. I politely declined, but she did it again and made it clear she wasn't moving until I smelled her arm. I finally did, said it was fine, and walked away as fast as I could. It was definitely one of the most uncomfortable moments I've had with someone. A girl grabbed my butt and jammed a digit up there while I was in Mexico. I was just watching the Day of the Dead dances and blammo, an index in my butt. Turned around and saw a little Mexican woman slip through the crowd. My girl was like, "Why did you jump?" And I explained that I'd just got a finger up there. Back in 1992, I was dating this girl from Chile. She really liked ABBA. Before we'd do the deed, she'd make me sing the song Take a Chance on Me while dancing undressed. If I refused to do it, there'd be no fun bedroom times. Being 18 years old and really only able to think about one thing, I'd sing the song and dance the dance. I hate disco. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and my girlfriend followed me and sat outside the door to wait for me, and I didn't notice. Opening up my bathroom door to see a humanoid figure sitting in the dark by my feet at 3 in the morning scared the ever-loving crap out of me. I've dated an artist a few years back. I got a notification on Instagram that she tagged me in one of her paintings, so I went to go check it out. Then I see it's a painting of her cutting off my eggplant while she's wearing a bunny suit. I then check out her Instagram story, and it's a photo of the painting in progress, and she's actually wearing a bunny suit while painting it. What happened when spicy pictures came up in an important presentation? I was a university professor, by which I mean I was a grad student filling the part as cheap labor. There was a time when QuickTime on the Mac would open the last video you were watching. I don't know if this was a feature or what, or if it's still an option, I have no clue. But I really didn't realize it somehow. I think I'd always just double-clicked my new video file and it opened. Well, I was sharing my screen giving a lecture and wanted to show a video clip. I clicked the QuickTime icon at the bottom, the window opens, and it's paused on a clip of my girlfriend at the time in a pretty compromising position. As soon as I saw it, I ripped the power plug from my computer, but it's a laptop. As soon as I realized it wasn't going to work, I pulled the VGA adapter thing out of the side. I said, "Oh, sorry, technical problems," and got a lot of laughs. I closed that effing thing down and launched the right video. Then plugged everything back in and went on like it never happened. After the class, one of the kids said, "You're hilarious." Thankfully, they're adults, and when they're that age, no one ever reported it or said anything as far as I know. My boss called our team in for a morning review. He was a bit like David Brent or Michael Scott, so at the end of the meeting he liked to show motivational videos. This one time he goes on YouTube, and as he starts typing, his laptop freezes with only the letter A in the search bar. He was looking for the Any Given Sunday speech. As I'm sure you know, when you first start typing, YouTube will make suggestions or show previous searches. So on the screen, the first result under the A was Asian lesbian massage. Everybody saw, nobody said a word. Before his laptop had unfrozen, he closed it up and said the video could wait until next time. It was never mentioned around him again, but the rest of us laughed about it for weeks. Why would you go searching for a YouTube video instead of just saving the link? That's just asking for bad things to happen. Too damn right. I don't think there's anything too compromising in any of my searches. Mostly it's these videos to see how you lot are responding to them. But even the most innocent person has got to have things they've written out of idle curiosity or something that their partner has asked them to look at, or that a friend wrote in to gross them out. It's not worth the risk. Save a link, folks. I was running a training class offshore. We wrapped for a break and I decided to check my personal email. Didn't think to turn off the projector because everyone was exiting the room and just didn't think about it. I was expecting an email from my mum maybe. I was really just going to quick scan the headers to make sure all of my bill payments had processed. Any sales? And I see an email from my bestie. Header says, "We miss you, here's your Christmas card." This should be sweet, so I click. And for a brief second, all of my friends were on the projector, undressed, posing in front of a Christmas tree, wearing Santa hats. I'm sure that a few of the trainees saw, but nobody said anything. Let me give some context that is important for understanding the why. I was interning at a small US ad agency in the early days of the internet. The boss/principal wanted me to do some internet research on something mundane. US automobile market shares, I think. He was going to be out of the office for a couple of hours, and I could use his desktop computer to do it, as interns back then had no computer to call their own. This is pre-Google, when adult content companies would manipulate keywords to show up in your Yahoo results, no matter what. So I searched for automobile market share or whatever, and I got a list of links. The whole first page of the list is adult sites, and my curiosity gets the better of me. I click on a few, just trying to understand what they could possibly have to do with automobile market share, poking around the metadata, and yes, of course, I'm just a bit titillated as adult content on the internet was a new concept to me at the time. However, I'm in someone important's office with the door open, so I quickly shut it down without any self-service and continue the struggle to complete the task at hand, leaving the browser window open with the data I found to satisfy his question. My boss gets back and quickly calls me into his office, asking basically, "What's the meaning of this?" Well, unbeknownst to me, pop-unders had just been invented, so I unknowingly left a dozen small browser windows full of adult ads sitting open under the main window with the research in it. That was a seriously awkward conversation, trying to explain that yes, I did click on some things, but honestly I wasn't being too inappropriate and I was just more baffled and confused. Even worse, the data I'd found was pretty much useless, so he essentially thought that the intern had just been whacking the mule in his office for the last 2 hours instead of doing the requested task. I was in Iraq. Part of my job was to publish this report that was sent out to basically every unit there. My coworkers and I had got into the habit of messing with each other on our shifts and leaving random things like mail members or turds on the screen for the next shift to find. One of my coworkers changed the title page of this report to say, "F this report," and I didn't catch the change until after it was already sent out to high-ranking officers throughout Iraq. Almost instantly I was bombarded by equal comments of, "What the frick," and "That's hilarious." Thankfully, our commander fell into the "that's hilarious" category, so we didn't catch too much crap for it. But I'm sure that ominous feeling I had took at least a few years off my life. When I was a kid, I went to my friend's bar mitzvah. Probably about 150 or so people attending. Halfway through the service, there's a time where everyone prays quietly to themselves, and at this point in the service, it's damn near silent in the room except for some quiet muttering. At that point, the rabbi decided to go to the bathroom. He also didn't turn off the lavalier mic on his lapel, and we heard him peeing, tooting, and saying, "Oh, well, goddamn," and yawning. At first, no one knew what the sound was, and then everyone figured it out at once. By the time we all knew what we were listening to, it was pretty much over. I did feel awful for him when he walked out. I'm sure someone said something at some point, but I never saw it. I used to work at a Fortune 100 back when the internet was a hot new thing. I was asked to do a demo of it to the top brass. Now, at the time, one of the cool things you could do was a tour of the White House. whitehouse.gov. So during my presentation, I typed in whitehouse.com, and it was an adult site. I survived. The funny thing is, the COO came up and asked, "Hey, if I wanted to visit the internet, what city is it in?" And I looked straight up at him and said, "It's not in any one place, it's everywhere all the time. It's kind of like a mind or a brain that's everywhere, all the time, you just need to plug into it." He looked at me and said, "Well, my God. The hippies won." I used to work for a point-of-sales systems company. My coworkers and I would mess each other's demo accounts, put in very inappropriate Easter eggs, among other things, which is okay because we weren't in customer-facing positions. All of a sudden, I get asked by my boss to go on site to a very important customer to train them and demo the system. I go there, it's quite a formal setting, the customer sets me up with a projector, there's about 7 people in this meeting. I start showing everything. Everything is fine until I show a lesser-known function of the system. It makes a picture pop up of a food item or product or whatever. My favorite jerk coworker had changed all of these pictures to some very unorthodox material. So I projected this picture of 2 guys going to town on each other with the didgeridoo. My immediate reaction was just to start laughing. Luckily, the other people started laughing too, and I said, "Well, as you can see, you can add any picture you want to this function, so if you're selling didgeridoos, eh?" Back at the office, everyone thought it was hilarious, and luckily the customer thought so too and is still with our company. Wow, kind of amazing that there's seemingly a whole company that has survived being staffed entirely by overgrown school kids. I mean, don't get me wrong, I find myself laughing at it, but it's potentially problematic today, and if you have to do it, maybe target a friend and not someone who'll cost your company thousands of dollars if it lands wrong and you lose their business. Oh boy, I was in that meeting once, and I've been dying to tell this story. Once upon a time, we had a client that built agriculture machinery. I'll call them John Stag. Their logo is a green and yellow silhouette of a leaping stag. Notice that I'm being very careful not to say the actual name. I don't know if they still do social media monitoring, but back then they'd listen for mentions of their brands, and stuff on the internet would get pulled. A lot. Anyway, when we do a presentation, we slap the client's logo on the cover page, and usually we get the logo from Google Image Search. We've occasionally used the wrong logo by mistake when 2 companies have the same name. It's a bit embarrassing, but no biggie. This time, my manager, a 50-year-old woman, took it upon herself to do the final edition, including finding the logo for the cover. What happened, if I recall correctly, is that she saw a pretty popular Instagram post that featured said logo, so she decided to screenshot and crop that. I didn't see the finished presentation beforehand. We go to the meeting. She opens the presentation in front of a couple of John Stag execs, and the logo is not their actual logo, but rather a parody, in which there are 2 leaping stags, one of which has a silhouette member and is mounting the other. If you Google John Stag parody logo, it's one of the top results. Me and the others were speechless. My manager didn't see the problem. "What, there's just 2 stags instead of 1, it's funny." And nobody dared point out that, "Lady, those stags are doing the deed." Even when she finally figured it out, she tried to brush it off as, "It's good your logo is so popular and recognizable that people make parodies." And the execs were, to put it lightly, not amused. So very much not amused. That company is no longer one of our clients. In the 60s, my great-grandfather used to show slideshows of the family vacations. He knew vacation slideshows were super boring, so he'd randomly slip in a slide with a pin-up girl on it. It wasn't a presentation, but a funny story anyways. In college, we were working laptops in a lab, and I left mine unlocked when I went to a washroom. When I came back, the room was silent because everyone was working, until I get an MSN message and my computer screamed at the top volume, "Hey, everyone! I'm looking at adult gay material over here." My usually stoic teacher just calmly said, "Mr. Mackey, can you please do that on your own time?" You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was presenting to our biggest client. That morning, I was browsing the internet and came across a picture with the title, "Screw that crap," and it was a cartoon visual of 2 turds doing the deed. I somehow accidentally saved it to my browser and it was labeled screwthatcrap.jpg. While I was presenting, the client said, "What's that?" and pointed to the "Screw That Crap" JPEG, and I embarrassingly tried to explain that I'd accidentally saved a pic my friend sent to me, but it set the tone for the rest of the presentation, I can tell you. Mine wasn't that naughty, but it was pretty funny. In high school once, when my friends and I had a group presentation, we decided to find our teacher's Facebook. We found some pictures of him really badly edited into a background where the Titanic was. We slid that into the presentation. The whole class laughed and ended up in the principal's office. Back when I was doing Tier 1 help desk, I was scheduled to remote into a doctor's computer to troubleshoot something minor. At the scheduled time, I called the doctor's office and the front desk admin picked up. She told me, "Oh, he's in with a patient right now, but you can go ahead and remote into his computer and do your thing." I remoted into the computer and my screen was suddenly filled with some of the most vivid, gay, adult film content I've ever seen. We had to present a mobile app of our choice for university and I chose DeviantArt. Okay, thanks to the filter, nothing was shown, but I had to present the different browsing mechanics, so when I ordered by new, I was sweating, praying for having no adult or disturbing art uploaded at this moment. Please, nothing unsafe for work. Oh, thank God, nothing's there. There were some suggestive things, but nothing disturbing or unusual. But this could have been the case. Also, since it was an English presentation and it was in France, I also had to explain why DeviantArt is named like that. Hopefully, I knew that. Well, on a bigger scale, instead of a small presentation, it was a big all-hands with a big company. There were 3 offices in the US and 2 international. We were all on Slack and this one guy was on their mobile. Said guy didn't know his camera was on and proceeds to walk into a bathroom stall. Sits down, mounts his phone on the toilet paper dispenser and watches the presentation. Luckily or unluckily, there were a lot of people on, so his thumbnail kind of got lost. But I and quite a few other people did notice him. We slacked him. The panic on his face and him fumbling for the phone were priceless. I'm going to say that there was a non-zero chance that someone watching was into that, so it counts against our title. Also, this is hilarious. Would have only been better if there was sound on as well as he let it rage in the bathroom. But life is rarely as beautiful as all that. Not me, and not technically an important presentation, but we had an art homework project once, just to research an artist. Most people usually didn't do art homework, but the teacher said that failure to hand it in would result in detention. This one guy copied and pasted a random website and emailed it to her, and included in what he copied was a link to some sketchy adult site. She clicked it in class. Everyone laughed, and that one guy got detention. Similar, but not as grand. My husband and I do this thing where we change the background or lock his screen on his phone to things to either gross out or make the other person laugh. It was my turn, and I set the background picture to some fan art from Tumblr of Rick from Rick and Morty with his eggplant out. But my husband didn't check his phone for ages and just forgot about it. His mum came over, I showed her something on the phone, and I pressed the button to go back to the home screen, but I didn't really look at it, I just had it in my hand, still talking. My husband took it off me and I just thought he needed to check something. But after she left, he was jokingly like, "Yeah, don't appreciate you waving Rick's rooster in my mum's face." And for a second I was confused, and then he showed me the phone, and I realized what I'd done. I laughed, but I was like, oh crap. She obviously never said anything, but she definitely saw. This was back in freshman year of high school for me. I was seeing my biological father at the time, and my 1 year younger stepbrother, who was also visiting, decided to use my school laptop for extracurricular activities. I'd been building a website for the web design class I was taking, and my brother just opened to a new tab, did the deed, minimized Chrome, and put the laptop to sleep. Come second period, I plugged my laptop into the class projector, woke it up, and turned Chrome on to find 2 male little people being pounded in the butt by some very butch women with rough-looking toys. There was a week of time where the school recommended I get disciplined outside of the school environment for that. Nobody believed it was my stepbrother. He got away with it. New work PC. I signed into Chrome with a personal account and forgot to turn off the Sync Everything setting, which also bought search history. Kicked off the video conference and was asked to navigate to whatever URL. There wasn't a single letter I could type into the address or search bar that didn't autocomplete into some disgusting filth. Best I could do was type their URL as fast as I could and hope that nobody noticed. Not my computer, but one of my jerk friends kept sending me videos that started off normal but ended with a really loud moan. I accidentally played one right before class with max volume. My chemistry professor was not impressed, to say the least. In high school, this guy saved his presentation through his phone, and when he took his USB and plugged it into the teacher's computer, there were dozens of undressed pics from the girls at the school showed on the smartboard. Even the teacher saw it. A few of the girls in the class were on the board. My teacher was frozen, and the girls were mad. I used to work for a tech startup company that had a presentation with some top execs of a Fortune 500 company. This was their biggest potential customer by far. It was so important that the president of the tech company insisted on doing the presentation despite minimal involvement in prior presentations. He was very excited to demonstrate a multimedia aspect of the product by browsing a live website. The site that he picked? Whitehouse.com, which was an adult site at the time, instead of whitehouse.gov. He was horrified when our product was quickly swallowed by a huge splooge-covered hoo-ha and a billion very clearly unsafe pop-up ads. This would have been an embarrassing but understandable mistake, but he quickly started mashing the keyboard in panic. I'm still not quite sure what buttons he hit, but he managed to completely crash the demo and mess up the keyboard, which ruined the remainder of the presentation. We didn't make that sale. Go figure. And we're 2 for 2 on the whole whitehouse.com issue. The narrator did do his, due diligence and check whitehouse.com and can assure all of our viewers that it seems to have been bought out by an election betting site. And right now, in mid-October 2024, the content is only slightly less concerning. This happened at my second high school back in 2007. The juniors and seniors took a business class starting from junior year, and the capstone project is called The Pitch, where a group makes up a fake business plan and presents it to real judges. When I was a senior, I was doing my school's required community service hours and offered to help man the check-in table for the judges, guests, and students. It was quiet for a few hours while the presentations were going on, but at one point the teacher stormed out of the room completely steamed. When I asked around, apparently one group left on one of their slides, "Thank you for coming, you condescending buttholes." I don't know what the punishment was, but it's surely a good lesson in why you always check your work. In 8th grade, we had a project to create a commercial for a product of our choice. Keep in mind, laptops weren't common for students, so we all had our commercials on phones or iPods and would plug it into the computer, which projected onto the wall. One kid plugged his phone in, and the teacher went to downloads instead of the gallery. The poor kid just knew what was happening and yelled, "No!" But it was too late, and he put his head down. The file took us straight to, P-Hub, and even the teacher couldn't stop laughing at him. One of the funniest moments in middle school. Many years ago, I was IT support, got called into a meeting room because some website that was being presented just wouldn't load properly. Web page was being projected to the entire room. I diagnosed as it was needing Java reinstalled and promptly went to www.jav.com, which is not Java and is in fact something very unsafe for work. Yeah, that second day is pretty important. The entire room was looking at the welcome page to a Japanese specialist interest adult site. In college, I took a chemistry class for an elective. My college required you to have at least one science credit to graduate, you see. It was actually really fun and I learned a lot. One of the requirements was to give 3 presentations, and during my second one, I made a sweet PowerPoint on the topic of calcium. I'd emailed it to myself because I couldn't find my flash drive at 4 a.m. when I finished the presentation. I get to class, set up the projector, and open my email on the computer. I'm talking to the professor and not really paying attention to what I'm doing, and I clicked on a spam email that just popped at the screen to a video advertisement of a girl getting destroyed by 2 huge guys with her massive chest swinging towards the camera. There was no sound, thank God, but the professor and the 19 or so students who were at class just burst out laughing. I used to work at Hastings Entertainment Store in the book department. One time I was asked by an elderly woman to look up a book, and I wasn't able to find it in my system. I pulled my phone out to do a quick Google search and opened my web browser, forgetting I'd just closed it on the middle of a video the night before. As soon as the browser opens, this lady was greeted to a sound she'd likely not heard in years. The sweet, sweet slapping and groaning of leather. She learned a new use for the word daddy that day. I closed the phone as quickly as possible and just retreated to the break room. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.